Once again, we gather together on Tisha B'Av to commemorate and to feel the pain of the various catastrophic losses that the Jewish people have experienced over centuries and centuries. And sadly today, in the year Tavshin Pei Daled, 2024, once again, the state of Israel, the Jewish people, are in an Eish Tzorah, a time of difficulty, war, loss of life, hostages, people who are in mourning, difficulties. And today we will address both current issues and the issues of the past, but really for the Jewish people, the past is never just past. We remember the past going all the way back, really to Sheshes and Bereshis, to the days of the creation of the world. I'd like to begin by thanking the Richard and Deborah Parkoff for sponsoring these presentations in memory of Richard's parents, Avraham ben Yitzchak HaKohen and Rochel Bluma Bas Yehoshua Alehem HaShalom. Personally, I have been presenting these programs centering upon the Kinos, the Lamentations for Tisha B'Av, for 36 consecutive years, beginning in my days, in my first days, earliest days, as the Rabbi of Congregation Shomrei Amunah in Baltimore, 36 years ago, and continuing into my career with the Orthodox Union and continuing to this very day. I want to thank all the people who were involved in all of these programs, to the other presenters, to Rabbi Hauer, to Rabbi Dr. Joseph, to President of the OU, Mitch Ader, and especially to my executive assistant, Mrs. Yocheved Goldberg, who has, as she has now for many years, prepared a companion booklet to the Kinos and to this program. And this companion booklet is also available online, and it will be very helpful to follow the outline, the pictures, the texts in that booklet. I encourage you to be able to do so on your whatever device you're watching this on. I also encourage you all, if you have not already purchased or obtained this edition of the Kinos of Tisha B'Av. It's the Kinos Misores Horav, co-published by OU Press and by Koren Publishers in Yerushalayim. This booklet, or book, is available through OU Press, and you can link to the link in the booklet and easily procure a copy of this book. We'll be following this Kinos book the way it's laid out, a translation, which is my own translation of the Kinos, which I prepared when this was first published. And more importantly, the extensive commentary of Rav Soloveitchik, who every year on Tisha B'Av would do a similar presentation to mine, only he would do it from early morning till the end of the day. And we have recordings of these presentations of Rav Soloveitchik, which have been edited by Simon Posner, so that they are easily readable by anybody who can follow them in English. And today, especially with some of the final Kinos of the day, we will be drawing from some of Rav Soloveitchik's teachings. We will be reciting several Kinos from this text, as well as some additional texts which I think will enhance the presentation and speak to the emotions which we all have at this time of the year, at this time in history. So let us begin. I'm going to begin with a phrase from which I drew the title for this presentation this year. The title I gave it is V'ishe Yisrael Usefilasam ... V'shuvecha L'Tzion Berachamim. Return to Zion with sacrifice and tears. And let me explain. We are familiar, most of us, with the text of the Shemona Esrei, which we recite 3 times or more every single day when we pray. And the text reads as follows. I'm going to be quoting from the Siddur HaGro, the Siddur attributed to the Vilna Gaon's Nusach, his take on Tefillah, which has with it the commentary entitled Siach Yitzchak, by a man named Rabbi Yitzchak Maltzan, who was a disciple of the famous Rabbi Yisrael Salanter and part of the first generation of the so-called Musar movement. The text reads, and I'm going to pronounce it 2 different ways, and tell me which one you're most familiar with. We can read the text, Ritzei, Hashem Elokeinu, Ba'amcha Yisrael Uvesfilasam. God, accept willingly your people Israel and their prayers. V'hoshev eso avoda l'dvir beisecha v'ishe Yisrael. And return the avoda, the worship, l'dvir beisecha, to your holy abode, to the Beis HaMikdash, to the holy temple. V'ishe Yisrael. Usefilasam, and their prayers, the prayers of the people of Israel. V'ahavo sekabel beratzon, accept them with love, with pleasure. Usehi l'ratzon tomid avodas Yisrael. And you'll be pleased with the prayers of Israel forever. V'sechezeno einenu, and may our own eyes see, b'shuvcha l'tzion berachamim, when you, God, return to Tzion, to Zion, with your compassion, berachamim. You notice the way I punctuated it. We pray, v'hoshev eso avoda l'dvir beisecha v'ishe Yisrael. God, restore the worship to your holy temple and the Ishe Yisrael, literally the fires of Israel, presumably the fiery sacrifices, the animal sacrifices which we brought in the temple. We want God to restore them. And then secondly, we say, Usefilasam b'yahavos hakabel. Please accept their prayers, Tzvilasam, their prayers, prayers of the people of Israel. That's one punctuation. However, the other punctuation is slightly different, but the difference is very important. God, restore the worship, the temple worship, to your devir, to your holy, holy abode. Stop. V'ishe Yisrael usefilasam. But the fires of Israel and their prayers, please accept them to kabel b'ratzo. Accept them willingly with your pleasure. 2 different punctuations, but they make all the difference in the world. And the difference borders upon the mystical. And let me explain. There's a pasuk in Divrei Hayomim. The exact reference is Divrei Hayomim Beis, Chronicles Roman numeral 2. Chapter Beis, and the pasuk is pasuk Gimel. Chapter 2, verse 3. It's in the middle of a narrative, a story. When Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, was building the temple, the first temple, he was trying to get the materials, the proper architecture, the proper decoration to make the first temple to be imposing. So he had a relationship with a Gentile king, Hiram Melech Tzor. Hiram, 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 Ches Yud Resh Mem, the king of Tzor. Tzor today is Tyre, Tyre, which is in the country of Lebanon today, and north of the land of Israel. And Shlomo and Hiram had a close relationship. And Shlomo asked Hiram to deliver certain materials, certain architects and artisans to come and help build the Holy Temple so that it would really be something of grandeur. And the pasuk reads, Hine ani boneh bayis l'shem Hashem Elokoi. I'm about to build a house of worship for my God. Lahaktish lo, to offer sanctity toward him. Lahaktir lefonov, ketores samim, to burn upon the altar the incense, the delicious spices, uma'areches tomid, and constant structures of worship, va'olos, animal sacrifices, laboker velo erev, in morning and in evening, l'shabbosos v'lachadoshim, to Sabbaths and to the beginnings of the month, to every holiday, u'lemoadei Hashem Elokeinu, to all the festivals of our God, la'olam zos al Yisrael, and this should be forever. So Shlomo is telling his confidant, Hiram, the temple is going to be permanent. We're going to start celebrating as soon as the temple is built, on every Shabbat, on every Rosh Chodesh, on every Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkos, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. La'olam zos al Yisrael. This shall be forever. And yet history didn't turn out that way. The temple lasted for several centuries and was destroyed. The Jews went into exile. They returned, at least some of them, from exile. And they rebuilt a second temple. And that lasted for several centuries. And that was destroyed. And here we are almost 2,000 years later, and we still do not have that temple. And yet, Shlomo told Hiram, we assume he knew what he was talking about. La'olam zos al Yisrael. This temple will never go away. It will be there li'olam, forever. How are we to understand that? Now, this is a question which is asked in the Gemara at the very end of Maseches Menachos. Maseches Menachos, the Talmud Bavli, Daf Kuf Yud, which is the very last page, among the last lines in the entire tractate of Menachos, an answer is given. And let me share with you the actual text of that passage in the Talmud. It's almost frighteningly mystical. It reads, after commenting upon this pasuk, La'olam, li'olam, forever. The Gemara is bothered by the question, forever? Obviously, even at times of the Talmud Bavli, the Babylonian Talmud, even the second temple was already destroyed. So what does he mean forever? So the Gemara says, Michoel sar hagadol omeid umakriv olav korban. You see, there are two Batei Mikdash. There are two temples. There is the real temple, which now is not in the hands of the Jewish people. And that's the temple Shel Mata. That's a temple here below in this material world. But corresponding to this temple, there was a heavenly temple, a celestial temple. And that temple has persisted Liolam. That temple, obviously, can never be destroyed. It's been with us spiritually all the time. Liolam, forever. And who is the Kohen Gadol? Who is the high priest who's running the show up there in the heavens and bringing sacrifices upon the altar in the heavens, whatever that means? Obviously, it's a very spiritual, mystical concept. It's the angel Michael, the angel Michael, Sar HaGadol, the great master. Omeid umakriv olav korban. He's standing up there in this heavenly temple, next to this heavenly altar, and he's delivering sacrifices. What kind of sacrifices is he delivering? Well, are there cows and goats and sheep and doves and pigeons in the heaven of heavens, in the Shemayim? No. So Tosfos there, on the spot, says, Midrashos chalukin hen. There are two different interpretations in the various midrashim about exactly what's going on here. What's Michael doing? Yesh Misha Omer. There's one opinion that says, you know what he's putting upon the altar? Nishmosehem shel tzadikim. He's taking the souls of the righteous, the souls of tzadikim, and they are being offered upon the altar. Powerful image. What does that mean? Consuming the neshamos. How can you consume a soul? A soul is not tangible. It's not physical. It's totally spiritual. What does it mean to offer them as karbanos in the heavenly Beis HaMikdash? That's one opinion. V'yesh misha omer, and others say, other midrashim say, kuvosim shelesh. No, he's offering fiery sheep as the sacrifice. Not actual sheep, but whatever that means. Kuvosim shelesh, fiery sheep. And Tosfos continues that the two different approaches to the punctuation of the prayer with which I began reflect these two midrashim. Those who say, they're following the second approach, that please restore, God, the worship of the temple and the fiery sheep, the actual animal sacrifices. So somehow, the actual animal sacrifices are also what we want to be restored presumably, in the physical temple below, in Jerusalem, and not in the high heavens. But the first interpretation, which brings Michael, the angel, into the picture, and the souls which are placed upon the altar, they read it actually the way I was brought up to read it, Nusach Sfard. Stop. Ve'isha Yisrael usefila sam tekabel b'yahava parotzo. So Ve'isha Yisrael and Tefillah Sam are approaching to two different types of spiritual sacrifices. One is Isha Yisrael. We'll speculate in a moment as what that could mean. The souls of the tzaddikim, Isha Yisrael. And then Utefillah Sam, and their prayers. I want to point out the note appended to this difference in punctuation, which is attached to this prayer in the Siddur Isha Yisrael. The Siddur is entitled Isha Yisrael, strangely, coincidentally, and that is Rabbi Yitzchak Maltzan in his commentary Siyach Yitzchak. He notices something which I bet many of you have never noticed. He was reciting all of Shmoneh Esrei. And who are we speaking about when we say, Urefo'enu Hashem v'nei rofei. God, heal us from our illness and may we be healed. It's we. We're speaking in the first person. Slach lanu. Forgive us. Re'ei v'yonyenu. Observe our suffering, our difficulties. Shema kolenu. Listen to our cries, listen to our voice. We're speaking in the first person, plural, our, us. God, listen to us, help us, cure us, heal us, forgive us, etc. Then suddenly we shift to Ritzei. And in Ritzei, we don't say, God, restore to us. We say, Usekabel b'rotzon es tefilosam. God, listen to their prayers. In other words, we're no longer speaking selfishly about ourselves and our own needs, but we're speaking about the Jewish people as a whole. Them, all of them. Kol Amcha Yisrael. A very important transition. A person who's consumed, and understandably and correctly consumed, with his or her own difficulties. And then we shift to Ritzei, where we speak in the third person. God, remember them, restore the avoda to them, to the Jewish people as a nation, not to me as an individual person or family or community. To all of them, all of the third person. Sufila Sam. But let's get back to Michael. What's he offering in these Isha Yisrael? What are these souls of the tzaddikim that he's offering on this mystical, spiritual, heavenly mizbeach? So let me speculate upon what that might be. First of all, when the Tur, his edition of the Shulchan Aruch, was a precursor of the Shulchan Aruch that we call Shulchan Aruch, and in Siman Kuf Dalet, Or Chaim, he quotes this passage in the Talmud and discusses the two variations on the punctuation. But the Beis Yosef, who was the author of the Shulchan Aruch, or Yosef Karo, he suggests that Isha Yisrael should not be translated the fires of Israel, the fiery sacrifices, but rather Isha is the plural for Ish. Ish is a person, a single person. The Isha Yisrael means the persons, the people, the individuals, the heroes and heroines of the Jewish people. These, I suggest, are the neshamos that Michael is offering upon the Mizbeach. God, Isha Yisrael, remember the people of Israel who have sacrificed so much in their lives, sometimes literally sacrificing their lives upon being burned at the stake, the Isha Yisrael, the fires of Israel, the people of Israel, to the Holocaust, to the tragedies of this most recent October 7th Simchas Torah. The Isha Yisrael L'Sefilasam. Those sacrifices should be recalled along with their prayers. Isha Yisrael L'Sefilasam. Isha, like Anoshe, people, the people of Israel who sacrificed so much over the course of their history to this very day. To this very moment, there are soldiers in the field defending the people of Israel, and unfortunately, well over 300 have died in battle since October 7th, and almost every day we hear of another tragedy, another fatality. Those are the Isha Yisrael. And those are the offerings that Michael, if no one else remembers them, and at this point in time, so many of the thousands, millions of Jews who have been killed al Kiddush Hashem, the Isha Yisrael, who remembers them? No one left to remember them in most cases. But Michael remembers them and sacrifices them daily, offers them upon the Mizbeach as a sign to God. Look how your people have suffered. Look how much they've suffered in your name. Where do I get the right to say that people, quote, ordinary people, just because they've sacrificed their lives on behalf of the Jewish people, on behalf of Kiddush Hashem, that they deserve such a high place in heaven, that even when the physical temple is destroyed, Michael still offers them upon this holy Mizbeach. And now I refer you to a passage in the Talmud, which was recently studied in those of us who studied Daf Yomi. Meseches Bava Basra, Daf Yud Amid Beis. Gemara there says, V'yomer Rabbi Avohu, Shalu es Shlomo. Shlomo, King Solomon, was asked. Solomon is the wisest of all men, so he was asked, Eizeu ben Olam Haba. Who is a person who is privileged on his death to ascend to the world to come? Various responses are given by Rabbi Yosef Bered Rabbi Yehoshua, who experienced what we call today a near-death experience. As Mar puts it, Rabbi Yosef Bered Rabbi Yehoshua Chalash, he was very sick, he was very, very sick, Ingid, and he died. It's some type of a near-death experience. But then he was revived and came back to life. And he was asked by his father, his own father, Rabbi Yehoshua, said to him, my son, you survived miraculously, you were revived, resuscitated from death. What did you see in that world? My chosis. And the son responds with various responses. You can consult the passage in the Talmud yourself to see the other responses. But I want to focus on this one. He said, there I saw the Haruge Malchus. When in my near-death experience, I experienced the world to come. I got a grand tour of the world to come. And who was sitting there in the highest place, the dais of everyone else who was in Olam Haba? The Haruge Malchus. Those people who were killed by the various kingdoms, governments, and states, and dictatorships that the Jews have suffered through over the course of the centuries. They're there, Haruge Malchus. And Ein Kol Bria Yecholo La'amod B'mechitzasam. No other creation can sit quite where they're sitting. They're at the peak, at the apex of the Olam Haba. There are many people who've deserved the Olam Haba, but they're on the ground floor and the middle floor, etc. But the top group are the Haruge Malchus, people who defended the Jewish people, who stood up for the name of God, who refused to convert to other religions, and were killed because of that. They stay in a mechitza, in a curtained room where no one else can stand. Ein kol bria yechola la'amod b'mechitzasam. So the Gemara asks, Man ninu? Who are all these Haruge Malchus? Who are all these people who have been killed by the Romans or the Nazis or whomever? Who are these people? Rabbi Akiva v'chaverov. You might think it's Rabbi Akiva and his fellows, people who were killed. Asara Haruge Malchus. Rabbi Akiva was killed by the Romans for teaching Torah. Perhaps he is standing in that mechitza, that highest place in Olam Haba. Well, the Gemara says, Rabbi Akiva didn't just merely give up his life. He wasn't merely killed by the Romans. No, he had so much other accomplishment. He had thousands of students. He's the Rabbi Akiva whose words we still study to this very day. So, Visulo, he's only getting credit for the fact that he was tortured to death. And what about all of his accomplishments during his life? Very good question. So the Gemara says, you're right, but we're referring to a different class of people who are not Rabbi Akiva, great scholars, who are Oker Horim B'tochnon Zelazeh B'halacha, who could uplift mountains of halachic pilpulim and grind them all together with intellectual power. No, we're talking about the Haruge Lud. That's all the Gemara says. The people who were killed in Lud. Lud to this day is a town in Israel. Who are the Haruge Lud? So Rashi there in Bava Basra tells us this full story about Haruge Lud. And the full story is quoted in Maseches Tainis, Daf Yudches Amud Beis. You could look it up there. But Rashi gives a very succinct picture of the story. And Rashi says, Lulyanus upapus, the name of these Haruge Lud, these people who were known as those who were killed by the Romans in Lud. Their names were Lulyanus upapus. Now, Lulyanus and Papus are not typical Jewish names. This is not Label and Peretz, right? This is Lulyanus, perhaps Lawrence, and Papus, perhaps Paul. People with distinctly non-Jewish names. Achim, they were brothers. Sharogam Turianus Beludkaya. Trajan, Trajan, was a Roman general. Turianus. There's different girsos about who this man was, but that's one girsa. Trajan in English translation. Beludkaya, which is Lud, the town of Lud, central Israel today. Kadamrina Meseches Tainis, Daf Yudches Amud Beis, Al Yedei Gezeira Shenigzeru Ar Yisrael. There was a terrible decree against the Jewish people at that time in history. Lahashmid, to destroy them. A final solution. Why? Al Shenimtzeis Bas Melech Haruga. The daughter of the king, the princess, was murdered. Who murdered her? The Jews. The Jews murdered her. So they accused us. And therefore, they were going to wipe us all out. V'chashtu es Yisrael, they thought, they accused the Jews of the murder. Notice, the Jews as a people. If there was a murderer who was Jewish, maybe there was one murderer, two murderers who killed her. But thousands, tens of thousands of Jews should all be killed. That's how it is. We experience some of this today. One Jew can do something which might be questionable or terrible. Every Jew in the world is blamed. V'chashtu es Yisrael aleha. They felt that the Jews killed her. So what's going to be? V'amdu ha'achim halalu. These two brothers, Lulyanus upapus, three ordinary Jewish people with Roman names, Lulyanus, Papus. They said, we're going to sacrifice ourselves. And we're going to confess that we were the murderers. We never saw the princess. We never touched the princess. We certainly never killed the princess. But we'll confess that we did it. If we confess, they'll kill us, and everyone else will be spared. V'yamru malochem al Yisrael. They went to the Roman officials and said, we confess we're the ones who killed her, and why blame the rest of the Jews? Anu horaknuha, we killed her. So this is the ultimate sacrifice. They protected the Jewish people with their lives for something that they were totally innocent of. Those are the Haruge Lud. All of their lives, they were Lulyanus and Papas. These weren't the Rabbi Akivas of the Jewish people. These were, if you can speak of an ordinary person, they were ordinary persons, but obviously they were not ordinary at all. They were heroes. And they stay in a place in the world to come that Ein Kol Beria Yechol Lamod B'Mechitzasan. No one else can go that high. But I would suggest that there's a subcategory of Haruge Lud whom we are familiar with today that in some way are defending the Jews in a way that's more effective than Lulyanus and Papus. Lulyanus and Papus offered themselves up as korbanos, Isha Yisrael. They were killed, perhaps they were burnt at the stake. Maybe they were hung, maybe they were crucified, maybe they were put in front of a firing squad, we don't know. They were killed. But they are the Isha Yisrael whom Michael to this day says, Ribono Shel Olam, remember Lulyanus and Papus from 2,000 years ago. Close to it anyway. But nowadays, we have soldiers in the field who risk their lives at this very moment and who are killed, unfortunately, by the hundreds. But while they're killing, giving up their lives, they're also eliminating or trying to eliminate the evil enemy. And that puts them on even, I'm suggesting, a higher level of that mechitza than Lulyanus Upapus. Not only are they offering their lives in the infantry, in the tanks, in the airplanes, etc., that are involved, but they're also eliminating Rishoim. And for this, I refer you to a medrash in a parsha we read just a few weeks ago, Parshas Pinchas. Pinchas killed an enemy of Israel. He killed Zimri, a Jewish enemy of the Jewish people. Unfortunately, there are such Jews too, or enemies of the Jews. But the pasuk says about him, "Vayechaper es bnei Yisrael." He brought forgiveness to the Jewish people. Kapora. Kapora is the highest level of forgiveness. Slachli, kaper, forgive me, God. Kapora. So the Medrash, in Medrash Rabbah, on those words, Vayechaper, asks, V'chi korban hikriv, shenomar bo kapora. Did Pinchas offer an offering? Pinchas was a Kohen. He could have brought a korban, literally a korban, but he didn't. He didn't. So why do we speak about Vayechaper? He brought about forgiveness. He achieved what a korban can achieve. Elo l'lamedcha. This is to teach you, says the Medrash. Shekol hashofech domon shel rishoim. Whoever helps wipe out evil, whoever combats evil, Ki'ilu hikriv korban. It's as if she has offered a sacrifice. So Lulyanus, Papus, and through all the centuries, all of those people who not only were killed al Kiddush Hashem, but who were killed al Kiddush Hashem while they were trying to fight the enemy. They were protecting Am Yisrael from their enemies who were out to kill them, and who on October 7th were quite successful with their dastardly plans. Those are the Isha Yisrael. Those are the people of Israel, or the fires of Israel, that we say to God, Isha Yisrael Usafilosam. We want both the sacrifice, the actual physical sacrifices of giving one's life up to protect the Jewish people, Usafilosam, and their prayers to Kabel Baratzon. God, please accept them, please remember them. That's what we have to do at this moment on Tisha B'Av. Remember not only Lulyanus and Papus, but the countless people who died al Kiddush Hashem, who were brutally murdered al Kiddush Hashem, and especially those, the soldiers of the Israeli Defense Forces, the Chashmonoim, the army of King David, all the soldiers who, of course, soldiers die in war, who died in defense of the Jewish people, who died combating and trying to eliminate our enemies. These are the Isha Yisrael L'Sfilasam, for which we ask God, remember them, remember their prayers, Shuvcha L'Tzion B'Rachamim, and return to Tzion with mercy, with compassion, with that divine compassion of which the Ribono Shel Olam is certainly capable. Well, that's just the beginning of our venture and perhaps adventure today, as we begin to reflect upon the history of the Jewish people, the nature of Kiddush Hashem, who stands in the highest mechitza in Olam Haba, and how we bring it up to date to the difficulties that we're facing at this very moment. Re'eva onyenu, v'riva rivenu. It's one of the prayers that in which we ask God for His assistance as we combat those with whom we are in conflict. After each discussion, like the one I just tried to deliver to you, we're going to turn to actual texts which we will recite or discuss together. Readings from the Sefer of Kinot, actual lamentations, but also passages from the Gemara, from the Talmud, and passages from the Chumash and from other places in the Tanakh. If you turn either to a Gemara Meseches Gittin, if you have that available easily, Daf Nun Zayin Omid Aleph 57a, or in your booklet to the first source that's listed. After the outline, Roman numeral 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we're moving now from Roman numeral 1 to Roman numeral 2. You see source number 1, it's in English letters, Gittin 557a. The Gemara Meseches Gittin has 3 or 4 pages, which deal with the incidents, the actual events that somehow triggered the Roman army's reaction to us. And almost in every case, to some extent, we were at fault for the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash and for the other horrible consequences of our misbehavior. We'll, as the day goes by, refer to various aspects of those passages in the Gemara. But today I'd like us to kind of almost together recite this particular passage. Because I hope to show you, there's a phrase here that says it all. As we look inside ourselves for what we might be doing that's insufficient, inadequate, and perhaps misguided. And we're all guilty of sometimes slipping up on things. Notice, Gemara says, Atarnagola va'atarnagolta. Because of a rooster and a hen, Choruv Tur Malka. Tur Malka is Har HaMelech, was obviously a large Jewish settlement in the land of Israel. And it was destroyed because of a tarnagol and a tarnagoles, a rooster and a hen. What's going on? What do a rooster and a hen have to do with the destruction of a big Jewish settlement like Tur Malka? Dahavo Nehigi, there was a custom, kind of an interesting custom. When a bride and groom would go out toward their chuppah, to become married at the wedding, mafki kamayu tarnagola v'tarnagolta. People would take a rooster and a chicken, and this became a symbol. May you multiply like a rooster and a chicken. You're a new groom, a new bride, you're getting married. May you multiply, have many children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, like a tarnagol and a tarnagolta. Sounds like a harmless custom. I don't know what the source of the custom is, but it was a Jewish custom once upon a time. Pru uravu katarnagolim. May you multiply and grow like this couple, the rooster and the hen. Yom echad, one day, Hava kochalef gunda diromoi. Passing by this Tur Malka. Tur is Aramaic for har, for mountain. Malka, of course, is Melech. Har HaMelech, that's the name of the village. It's not a village, it was a large settlement. One day, a gunda, a troop from the Romans, the Romoi, a Roman troop, Roman soldiers, were passing by. Shaklinu minayu, they passed by, so soldiers are hungry. And they see the Jews are celebrating with this chicken and this hen and this rooster. So they decided, we're going to take, spoils of war. We're going to take the chicken and the rooster. What should have been the Jewish response, Unfortunately, then the Jews were defenseless. There's no IDF in those days. And the Roman army is the most powerful army in the then known world. They stole 2 chickens. Okay, let them have the chickens. No. Naflu walayu mechonhu. The Jews jumped upon these soldiers, and jumped upon them and protested and beat them up. So the soldiers, rather than reacting, went to the general or the Caesar. Amru leila Caesar, asu amru leila Caesar. They went and reported to the Caesar, but they didn't just say that the Jews were upset because we stole 2 chickens, so they got a little violent. No, Mordu Bach Yehudoi, the Jews are rebelling against you. So the Caesar's in Rome. He gets a report from the ground, from the soldiers in Turmalka, somewhere in Israel. Then they send a telegram, or however they communicated in those days. Caesar in Rome, Mordu Bach Yehudai, the Jews are rebelling. No, Caesar hears that the Jews are rebelling. You got to put the rebellion down with all due force. Also Alayu. So the king came and sent the troops, divisions, brigades, troops. Haba Bahu Hahu Bar de Roma. There was a hero among the Jews, the man from the south. Some speculate perhaps was Bar Kochba, a Jewish hero. You could read along with me. The Havikofitz Mila Vikotel Behu. He could jump a mile. He was an athlete. He was a hero, a Shimshon HaGibor. And he was able to kill some of the Roman soldiers. Shaklei Kesel Etage, the Osfe Aara. The Caesar took his crown and put it on the ground. In other words, if the Jews can have an uprising and fight back and actually kill some of my Roman troops, it's time for me to take my crown off my head and put it on the ground. Omar. And by doing that, he, Caesar, the Caesar, Caesar is the word Czar or Caesar, same word, Caesar, Czar, Caesar. Riboine di Almakula, God, master of the universe. All of a sudden, the Caesar of Rome, we don't know which Caesar this was. Caesar was a name for all the rulers of Rome, not just Julius, but all the others. And he prayed to God. And he said, Inichalach, God, I am the king of Rome. I am the Roman emperor. You can't give me over to this Jew, this single Jew who happens to be a hero who can jump a mile. I don't want to be, if Rome is defeated, it should be defeated by an enemy and overpowered us. But one little Jew boy should defeat us. God, you got to help me out. Lo simsere lahu gavra. Don't allow me to be given over to this Bar de Roma, this Jewish hero. You're going to give me, the king, and my whole kingdom into the hands of one measly little Jew? To this guy, Chad Gavra, this person? God, you got to help me. Strangely, the Caesar spoke to God. He asked God for help against the Jews. So Barderoma said something in response to this report that Caesar is praying to God to help him. So Barderoma, this Jewish hero, he misspoke. His mouth tripped him up. V'yamar, and he said these words, Halo ato Elohim zenachtanu. God, you have forsaken us. You have abandoned us. V'lo seitze Elokim b'tzivosenu. And you no longer go out in front of our armies. So this is blasphemy. God, you've forsaken the Jewish people. How can you do that? And he said that, and of course, that was a michshol. That was an obstacle. To say such a thing, it's literally blasphemy. So the Gemara immediately objects. These weren't his words, just Barderoma. This wasn't this hero's words. These are words in Tehillim. These are words in Tehillim, words in the Psalms. David Nami Amar Hachi. David also said these words, and David wasn't held guilty of blasphemy. So why are you calling this a michshol? Achshele pume. The Gemara answers, David asmue komisam. The way you read that pasuk, it depends upon the nigun, upon the melody. If you say it with an exclamation mark, God, you have abandoned us, you've forsaken us, what kind of a God are you? You're not leading us anymore, you're no help. Exclamation point, that's blasphemy. But if you say it as a question mark, that's how David said it. God, are you, Atalo ato Elokim zenachtanu? Are you going to abandon us? V'lo seitze Elokim b'tzivosenu? And are you not going to lead our armies into victory? Question mark. That's how you read that pasuk in Tehillim. That's what David was saying. That's not blasphemy. That's questioning God. God, where are you? I need you now. All the Beis HaKisei. So the Caesar, the Caesar, went to the Beis HaKisei. A human being, he had to go to the toilet. Also, darkona is the word dragon, dragon. A dragon, in other words, some type of a reptile or something, came, and he's sitting on the Beis HaKisei. He's sitting on not on the throne, but on the toilet. And this dragon, this reptile, comes and attacks him in a very vulnerable place, and pulls out his intestines, v'noch nafshe, and he dies. He dies. That's the end of, not of the Caesar, that's the end of Bar Deroma. He died. Omar, so he said, the king said, Hoil v'yisrachash li nisa, ha zimna ish bekinu. He said to him, since a miracle happened, this time I'll leave the Jews alone. I was spared, I'll leave the Jews alone. Shavkenu va'azal, he left the Jews alone, he went back to Rome. What did the Jews do? They celebrated. Izdakur, they began to dance and sing, va'achalu ushaso, and they ate and they drank. V'yadliku shrogi, and they lit candles. They had a big party, a mass party, thousands of Jews celebrating. The Caesar went back to Rome. The army's not going to bug us anymore. We're safe, etc. And they lit so many lights that the whole neighborhood became illuminated. Ad de ischaze bilyono de gushbanka, until you could see the features on a coin, all right, on a seal, S-E-A-L, on a coin, you could see the features. You could see the picture of Abraham Lincoln or Julius Caesar on the coin, Barachok Mila, from a mile away, because it was so well lit, because they were dancing and singing and partying. Omar, so now the king gets a report. The Jews are dancing and singing and celebrating. Oh, that's no good. I spared them, but they better understand, we're still in charge here, Rome. And you're standing and dancing and singing and eating and drinking and lighting candles all over. No. Omar, you're mocking me. Your celebrations are mocking me, says the Caesar. He came against them again. But this time, he came against them with no resistance from Bar Deroma. No resistance. He overwhelmed the entire community of Tur Malka. Omar Ravasi. Ravasi comes along and says, Ravasi is a student of Rabbi Yochanan, quite a bit later than this event happened, but he had the statistics. Plus Meya Alpha Shlifa Saifa Alu Tur Malka. 300,000 sword bearers came to Tur Malka. He threw his entire armies, thousands, tens of thousands of soldiers against Tur Malka. V'katlu bo tlosa yumi, and they murdered, massacred Jews for 3 days, v'tlosa lelvosa, or for 3 nights. This was in uptown Tur Malka. Uptown Tur Malka was being wiped out, eradicated, a terrible massacre, a pogrom, worst, terrible. But don't forget the whole community, not just uptown, but downtown, Tur Malka, they were also celebrating and dancing, etc., etc. Bahach Gisa, downtown, there was no massacre, no pogrom. A mile away, Bahach Gisa, Hilule v'chingi. They're still celebrating, they're still dancing and singing. Velo havuyadi hani bahani. The people downtown didn't know what was going on uptown. I was in Israel on October 7th on Simchas Torah in Yerushalayim. We knew something was going on, but we didn't really know. We were not going to go look for the electronic news. We didn't know what was happening in the so-called Gaza envelope, in Be'eri, etc. We didn't know what was going on. And we tried to continue with Simchas Torah. V'lo havayadi hani bahani. Even in this day of instant communication, we didn't know what was going on. 30 miles away? We didn't know what was going on. When Jews aren't aware of the suffering of other Jews, that's terrible. That's terrible. There were times in Jewish history, of course, where we just didn't know. The Jews in Morocco didn't know what was going on in Poland. The Jews in Poland didn't know what was going on in Yemen because primitive communications. But let's move forward several centuries. Let's move forward to the time of the Holocaust. The Jews of America claimed, V'lo yadi hani bahani. They didn't know what was going on in Europe. I was a very young boy at the time of the Holocaust, 4 or 5 years old. But it was late in 1944, that my great-grandmother began to become aware of what was happening to her sisters and brothers and children and nieces and nephews back in Poland. And she began to fast every Monday and Thursday for the people. But the Jewish community as a whole went on living their lives as well as they could. It was in the middle of a war. America was at war. But we, living in Brooklyn, were not aware, or barely aware of what was going on until very late. V'lo havayani hani bahani. And this is something to really be careful about, especially now with our instant communications easily available, to stay in touch with what's going on. We may have the luxury, safety of living in the United States of America. Most of the audience is there, I would imagine. But what about the people who are suffering all over the world? What about the people on the front lines? And the front lines now extend not only to Gaza, but to Lebanon, to the Hezbollah, to the West Bank, etc. And even in recent times, the Houthis in Yemen have become our enemy and have effectively been able to reach Jewish towns, Jewish cities, Jewish citizens with their drones and relatively primitive rockets. We have to avoid this terrible mistake of v'lo havayadi hani bahani, of not knowing how Jews in other places, in other situations, in other conditions are suffering. We have to be yadi hani bahani. We have to feel their pain. We have to work with them in any way possible to help them, to save them, etc. So I want us to look back, what are the roots of this v'lo yadi hani bahani? How can it be that Jews living in downtown Tur Malka weren't aware of the massacre that was going on uptown? V'lo yadi hani bahani, and go on celebrating as if nothing was happening that they had to be upset about. So I want to go way back to the beginning. When did everything we mourn on Tisha B'Av, when did it all start? What was the ultimate root? So we know, among other things, the Meraglim. Bachu b'chiyo shel chinam. The Jews were crying for naught. God said, okay, you're crying for naught back in the desert so long ago. I'll show you what suffering means. You think you're suffering now? You're going to have suffering Tisha B'Av. That's going to be the Churban by Hamikdash, the expulsion of the Jews from Spain, all sorts of horrors. But I suggest that it goes back to quite a bit before the Meraglim. And it goes back to some of the psukim that you can see now in source number 2 in your booklet, or you can look in the Chumash for these sources. In the Chumash you'll find that these psukim, remember, Yosef was sold into slavery by his brothers. That was the beginning of the terrible, terrible fault that we all have. All of us must confess to it, of sinas chinam, of one brother, what should I say, misjudging and disliking and hating his fellow brother, his fellow Jew. So they sold Yosef into slavery. They sold him into Egypt, of all places. He was there for a long time. We know the whole story. And finally, the brothers come back to Egypt to get some food for Papa, for Yaakov Avinu, who's back home in Eretz Yisrael. And they come before Yosef. Yosef now, they don't recognize Yosef. Yosef now has a big crown on his head and royal garments, and he is a shalit. He's the ruler of just about all of Mishnah Lamelech. He's the top advisor to the king. And Hu HaMashpir, he's the one who's supplying food to the entire then known world. There was a famine everywhere, and he had stockpiles of food. So they come to him, and they come into his courtroom, his throne room, and they see him, and he sees them. Vayaker Yosef es Echov. He recognizes them. He recognizes his brother. Vehem lo hikiruhu. They did not recognize him. Not only that, but when they talk to him, they talk in Ivrit. They don't know Egyptian, and they assume that he doesn't know Ivrit. He doesn't know Hebrew. How can he know Hebrew? So there's a translator who knows Hebrew and Egyptian who's translating back and forth. But they are so unaware of the fact that this is their brother, that this is Yosef, that they say, this guy, this Egyptian prince, this Egyptian big shot, he don't know who we are, and he doesn't understand a word we're saying. As the pasuk says, "V'heim lo yodu ki shomea Yosef." They didn't understand. They didn't know that Yosef understood every word they were saying. So what do we have here? Yosef recognizes who they are. They don't recognize who he is. I must share with you a concept which I heard not so long ago from Rabbi Beryl Wein, may he be well, Shlita. Rabbi Wein points out that recognition is one of the most powerful strengths of human beings. The ability to recognize each other, to know who the other person is. And on the opposite end, on the receiving end of recognition, the best thing you can do to a person is not to feed him, not to give him a few bucks. It's to recognize him, to say, I remember you, I know you, you need this and that and the other thing. This is how I can help you. This is how we can work together. This is how we can be a chavrusa. To recognize the strengths of the other person. To recognize and to be recognized. Recognition is very, very powerful. However, we often fail to recognize. We fail to recognize. We don't really understand the other person. The brothers, they had in their mind, it's been years and years since Yosef went wherever he went. We sold him. They didn't know what happened to him. Years and years. He must be gone. If he's alive, he's the same old spoiled brat that he was. He's the same old tattletale who goes to Papa and tells him all kinds of gossip about us. He's just a misled child. That's what they were expecting. If we find Yosef, he's going to be the same old Yosef that he was all these years ago. When he left us, he was how old? 17 years old. A wild teenager. That's all he is. They came to Mitzrayim, and they saw this handsome young man with a beard and a royal dress and people all around him, surrounding him, servants and whatnot. They couldn't imagine, they couldn't possibly recognize him. Their judgment of Yosef was this little kid who was always combing his hair and running to Papa with tattletales. They couldn't imagine that this royal prince, this royal lord, this royal shalit and mashpir was their brother. He could recognize them. And I remember Rabbi Wein saying in his own inimitable way that Rashi is bothered by this question. How can he recognize them, but they didn't recognize him? So Rashi says, because when he left them, he was a teenager. He didn't have a beard. And now he has a full beard, so they didn't recognize him. So Rabbi Wein said to his audience, You don't recognize somebody because he has a beard? I see people I haven't seen for 20 years and they didn't have a beard, and or they had a black beard and now they have a gray beard, and I recognize them. It take me a minute or two, but I recognize them. You can't recognize somebody because he has a beard. People who knew me before I had a beard and haven't seen me in 50, 60 years, they recognize me. Maybe it takes a question or two, but they recognize me. What was so difficult to recognize? And that's why Rabbi Wein insisted, because if you have a prior thought in your mind about what this is all about, who this guy is, you're not going to recognize him, because you can only see him as you once saw him. I often think of, sometimes the family has, like we used to back in the old days in Borough Park in Brooklyn, if we had a wild fellow in our class who just was a troublemaker and had difficulty with his parents, he didn't clean up his room and he was nasty to his baby brother and baby sister or whatever. So they would say, we're going to send you away to yeshiva. In those days, they would send them to Tells in Cleveland. And in Tells, they would make a mensch out of him. And often that's exactly what happened. So he would leave home, let's say, the end of the summer and go to Cleveland from Brooklyn. That's like 1,000,000 miles away. And he would go to yeshiva. And in yeshiva, he did very well. And why did he do well? Because the Rabbi said, you're doing great. Keep up the good work. And they gave him a nice award. And he got some credit points, and they gave him a special job, and they commended him because he was helping out some of the younger students. So he came back a changed person. But when did he come back? Sukkot, he came home. All right, so a month, two later, he came home. As soon as he comes home, what do his parents do? They still think of him as this wild kid who can't get along with his brothers and sisters and who leaves his room messy, etc. And of course, maybe he left, unfolded towel in his bedroom. So his mother right away says, you're the same old guy as you were before. You didn't improve at all. What am I sending you away to yeshiva for? Look, your room is still a mess. Because in her mind, he was still the same, Vildachaya that he was before. And she didn't allow for the fact, Heim lo hikiruhu, she didn't recognize it. No, he's a budding yeshiva bacha. He's becoming a good student and he's improving. You have to recognize a person's progress. Rabbi Wein ended that little talk with a footnote. This little talk was delivered soon after October 7th. It was at the point where they discovered a tunnel which is 100 meters away from one of the checkpoints, Israeli checkpoints into Gaza. 100 meters away, there was an entrance and an exit from a tunnel. So you didn't see this before? I mean, for 10, 15 years, these people have been digging these tunnels and all around, and you're right there 100 meters away, it's your checkpoint, and you didn't see this tunnel. Why? Because we were expecting, the ceasefire, nothing big is going on, no big deal. You didn't recognize what was in front of you, and that's possibly all the missteps that were taken in those and led to that the horrible Simchas Torah that we all witnessed, saw in one way or another. You have to recognize what's real, what's really happening and they couldn't. But look, what did Yosef do? He saw they didn't know who he was. They didn't think he spoke Hebrew. Vayisov be'aleihem vayef. He turned away from them and cried. Now here we come to crying, to tears. Remember, the title of this program is Return to Zion, Return to Zion, with sacrifice. We spoke a bit about sacrifice and tears. And now we're going to look at Yosef's tears, Joseph's tears. He cried because they don't recognize me. They don't see I'm a different person. I'm a person who could bail them out, who can save them, who could feed them, who could redeem them, who could make them safe. They didn't see me that way. They didn't see that this was me, that this was Yosef. And then finally, when Yosef, they bring Binyamin, etc., and he's ready to say, Ani Yosef, I am Yosef. But he's not quite ready to say it. But he sees that the brothers are talking, and the brothers are saying, why we're suffering so, and this prime minister is giving us such a hard time? It's because Avol Hashem Anachnu, because we're guilty. Notice, they don't say because we feel sorry. They don't cry about what they did to Yosef and sold him into slavery. They feel guilty. Let me tell you something. Guilt doesn't make you a better person. Tears, regret, sincere regret, tears, crying, that can make you a better person. Guilt, you feel guilty. All right, so you go, Hashamnu, Bagadnu, Gazalnu, and finished. That's not enough. There have to be tears. And they weren't crying. We never find that they cry. Only Binyamin cries, but no one else cries. And Yosef, of course, cries again and again, as we see now. Vayemaher Yosef, look at now, again in source number 3, and you can look at the chapter numbers for where these psukim are, if you have a chumash with you. Vayemaher Yosef, ki nichmeru rachamov el echo, vayevakesh livkos. Yosef wanted to cry again because Yosef knew the power of tears. Vayavo hachedra, he didn't want to cry in front of them, so vayev shama, he went into his private room to cry, just between him and God. Vayeshu lefanov, then he sat them at the table. He took all his brothers and sat them at the table. He sat Reuven in seat number 1, Shimon in seat number 2, Levi in seat number 3. So let me tell you something. If you have the slightest suspicion that this guy, he might be Yosef, and then you see that he sits you in your birth order, in your rank order, and he puts Yisachar before Zvulun and God before Asher, etc., you begin to get it. You should get it. Oh, this is Yosef. No one else is going to know that Reuven is older than Shimon, and Shimon's older than Levi, etc. So what was their reaction? Stunned, shock. That's not a reaction, all right. What's going on here? Never enters their mind, this is your brother. Don't forget your brother, okay? No, they still can't see that. And we can go a little bit further in the other psukim about Yosef's tears. V'lo yachol, finally Yosef can't contain himself any longer. So what does the pasuk say? V'lo yachol Yosef lehisapek. Yosef couldn't restrain himself anymore. Vayikra, and he called out, Hotziu kol ish me'olai. Get everybody out of the room, just me and these people. These guys from Israel. V'lo omad ish ito behisvada Yosef elocho. When Yosef revealed himself, there was no one else in the room. All the soldiers, all the slaves, all the servants, all the assistants, secretaries, undersecretaries, executive assistants, they all left. And he's left with his brothers. Vayitein es kolo b'vchi. Again he cries. And he cries aloud. Vayitein es kolo b'vchi. He cries out loud. And who hears him cry? Vayishmu Mitzrayim. The whole rest of Egypt hears him cry. Everybody left the palace door. Maybe the windows were open, and they hear him cry through the windows. Vayishma Beis Paro. Paro sitting in his castle, and Yosef is in his office suite, and Paro hears him. The whole family of Paro hears Yosef cry. Do the brothers hear Yosef cry? No. Vayoma Yosef elochav ani Yosef. Yosef said finally, I am your brother. Ha'od avichai. V'lo yachlu echol la'anoso so ki nivhalu mipono. Their reaction is shock, nivhalu, behola, confusion. They're all confused. They still can't get into focus that this person in front of them is brother Yosef. This is, to quote the Gemara we looked at before in Gittin Nun Zayin, Lo yadi hani bahani. Yosef and his brothers are in a room facing each other, maybe Dalet Amos away from each other or less, and Yosef can see clearly who these people are, and they still don't get it, even after he cries out loud. They don't hear him. Paro hears him. Everybody hears him in the whole Mitzrayim, but not his brothers. And, except for one exception. Vayipol al tzavre Binyamin achiv vayev. Yosef falls upon Binyamin's, his kid brother, same mother. He cries. Yosef cries again. This is the 5th or 6th time he's crying. And he cries, and Binyamin responds with tears. But only Binyamin. Where's Reuven's tears, Shimon's tears, God's tears, Asher's tears? It's still lo yadi bahani. They still don't get that this guy is their brother, and it's a whole different ball game. They don't get it. And he kisses each one of them. And he cries for them. Did they kiss him back? Did they cry in return? No. They speak to him. All right. That's a madrega, you know. At least they're talking to him now. But there's still no reaction of recognition. You are Yosef. How is it? How do you manage to this point? We're so sorry for what you did to us. What we did to you. That's missing. That's missing. They talk to him, all right. But there's no tears. There's no apology. There's no kiss. Then, of course, Yosef's father comes eventually. And again, Yosef cries. Vayipol Yosef al panei aviv, vayefk olav vayishak lo. So again, crying and kissing. This is Yosef's thing. He cries and he kisses his father. Now, where does it all end? Does it get any better? Does it get any better? Did the brothers finally really recognize Yosef? So what happens? They're there for a bunch of years. And finally, Yaakov Avinu dies. And they take him together to Yaakov's father, to their father's funeral, and they bury him in Eretz Yisrael, etc., and they come back. You would think now the brothers would recognize who Yosef is. He came, he stood by the graveside, he said Kaddish, the same as we're saying Kaddish. He tore his begodim, the same as we're tearing our begodim. He is our brother. No, they're afraid. Lu yistamenu Yosef. Yosef is going to hate us. Papa's gone. Yosef is going to go back to his old ways, and we're in big trouble. So we got to tell him some cockamamie story that the father told us that, you know, the whole story. You have to take care of us. Lu yistamenu Yosef. Maybe he's going to v'hoshev yoshiv lanu es kol horo asher gomalnu also. Maybe he's going to get back at us. He's going to get even with us. He's going to take retribution. He's going to take revenge against us. Because therefore, we got to tell him, you know, sono lefeshav de'elokei avicha, etc. And what is Yosef's response? Final response, vayef Yosef b'darbo my love. Yosef is still crying. You guys still don't get it. After all these years, after Papa died and everything, you should know already, I'm your brother. I'll take care of you. I got your back, etc. No, they still don't get it. We're afraid he's going to hate us. He's going to get even with us. By the way, this is an example of what psychologists call projection. When you feel that someone's going to hate you, obviously you hate him. So you think he's going to hate me because I hate him. You know, Kamayim haponim leponim, the pasuk says. And here too, Lu yistamenu Yosef is coming from their sinas chinam is still not resolved. If they would stop being hateful, they would understand that Yosef is not going to be revengeful. Yosef is not going to get even. Yosef is not who he was when he was 17, when we sold him into slavery. Yosef is Yosef. Yosef is our brother. Ani Yosef, achichem. And they never get it. And this tragedy continues, all the way down to Tur Malka, maybe 1,800 years ago. O yadi hani bahani. They still didn't connect. The guys downtown are still partying when the guys uptown are being massacred. Lo yadi hani bahani. We have to be so careful not to continue this trend among our people to be at odds with each other, to look down upon each other, etc. I came across a passage in a fascinating sefer that I could recommend highly. It's a sefer called Tomer Devorah. It's a mystical, Kabbalistic sefer written by the great Mekubal Rabbi Moshe Cordovero. But I came across a 2-volume explanation of Tomer Devorah. Tomer Devorah is mysticism, it's Kabbalah. It's not easy for uneducated people like myself to really understand what the Tomer Devorah is saying. So someone came along and published a commentary on Tomer Devorah called Safa Berura. So when the Sefer Tomer Devorah, with the notes of this contemporary Rav, entitled Safa Berura, he expands upon the writings of the Tomer Devorah. So the theme of the Toma Devorah is we have to imitate God. And in the Kabbalistic system, God has various qualities, SS Sephiros. There are 10 spheres of God's power. And Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferes, etc. And we have to emulate and copy those Sephiros. But the highest of all the spheros, the highest place is the Keser, the so-called crown of God. That's beyond. That's way above us. But nevertheless, there are ways in which we can even imitate the Keser, the crown. So the Sefer, the commentary Sefer, Sofer Berura, expands upon this in such a beautiful way. How can a Jew, or any human being, emulate God's Keser, God's crown? It's way above our human connections. Well, what we can do is every time we see another human being, a fellow Jew, no matter where that person is at religiously, on the left, he's on the right, he's rebellious, he's off the derech, on the derech, no matter where he is, imagine him with a crown on his head. Everyone has a crown on his head. You've got to recognize that crown. Everyone has potential. Everyone can improve. Everyone has value. Everyone is worth. Every life is valuable. Everyone has a crown on his head. Everyone has imagine, he suggests we actually imagine it. Close your eyes and imagine the guy in front of you is not just some guy or some gal. The guy in front of you or the woman in front of you is a prince or a princess with a crown on his head. The brothers never got that, Joseph's brothers. They still were afraid. He's the same old Joseph. He's going to take revenge. He's going to get back at us. Lo yadi hani bahani. Ahem lo hikiruhu. We have to find ways of restoring that connection. And one way of restoring that connection is through tears. I'd like to present to you as we go ahead a little bit in our outline, and we begin to speak about the Holocaust. Until October 7th, 2023, we thought the Holocaust was behind us. It's over. 70-something years ago. And it's over. It was terrible, etc. Fewer and fewer among us living today were actually victims of the Holocaust and survivors of the Holocaust. Time goes on, and there are fewer and fewer people who actually experience the Holocaust with their own bodies. And in the recent years, every time we look back, certainly when we look back at the destruction of the First Temple, destruction of the Second Temple, they're so long ago, thousands of years ago, hundreds of years ago. And the same thing is true of all the other catastrophes in Jewish history. We look back at them, oh, those were terrible times. But that was in Spain in the late 15th century. That was in Poland or Ukraine today in the mid 17th century. That was the pogroms in the 1800s. That was czars of Russia who told us where we couldn't live and what kind of jobs we could have and that we couldn't go to have any secular education, et cetera, et cetera. That was all past us. Now we're living here wherever we happen to be in the Golis of the United Kingdom or of South Africa or of Australia or of the United States of America or Canada, et cetera. So it's all past history. It's all past history. And even in Israel, people were feeling, these are all history. The Holocaust is history. 1948 is history. 1967 is history. 1973 is history. And then came October 7th, Simchas Torah, Tafshin Pei Dalet. Simchas Torah, it's not over. And the reactions to our reaction to the attack, to the vile, vicious, perverse attack of our enemies on October 7th, it's not over. It's not over. People refer to it, the media refers to it as the worst pogrom since the Holocaust, as if it's an ongoing chain of disasters, and we had this Holocaust, and then we had a break for 70 or so years, and now here it is again. And anti-Semitism throughout the world. I don't have to go on and on about that. That's something we all experience. It's not over. But we do have to remember the Holocaust as something very, very, very important to remember and not to forget. What I suggest is, instead of a kinot, an actual lamentation from the Sefer of Kinos, that we talk about a woman, a poet, who won the Nobel Prize in 1966. The Nobel Prize for Literature was given to two Jews, to Shai Agnon, the famous writer, and to Nellie Sachs, a woman, a poetess of great power. Whereas Agnon wrote in Hebrew, Nellie Sachs wrote in her native language, in German. She survived the Holocaust. She went through some bitter experiences, obviously, but survived. And she wrote many, many poems about the Holocaust and about her memories and experiences during the Holocaust. And she wrote many, many poems. I recommend that you look for her book of poems called Oh, the Chimneys, because she writes about the chimneys of Auschwitz and its colleagues. And she wrote the following poem, and you can follow it in the Hebrew translation in source number 6. In the English translation, it's Oh, the Night of the Weeping Children. So she's imagining a scene during the rage of the Holocaust, when a number of little children were separated from their parents, their mother. Mothers were sent to the gas chambers and they were thrown into some side room somewhere. And of course, little children, babies, toddlers, 6-year-olds, crying and obviously don't know where they are, what's happening. To say the least, they feel afraid and abandoned. So she writes this poem. And let's read that together, because this is a kinot. This is a lamentation, if there ever was one. Hoi, leil hayeladim habochim. Oh, the night of the weeping children. Hoi, leil hayeladim hamiyuadim lemoves. Oi, the night of the children branded for death. Hamiyuadim, I would translate that, destined for death, assigned to death. They're on the list. They're not just branded. They're on the list, miyuadim, ya'ad. The destiny is, within the next few hours, death. Hashena mikan v'hola. Sleep is far away from them. Sleep may not enter here. Mikan v'hola. How can they sleep? They're hungry, they're scared, they're cold, it's dark. Umanot ayumot. There are nursemaids, in other words, there are Gestapo women who are, quote, taking care of them, but these are ayumot, these are frightful, terrible nursemaids. These are scary women. This is not mama, this is not Bubby. These are scary ladies. Umanot ayumot, terrible nursemaids. Lakhu es mekomon shel ha'imahot. They have taken the place of mothers. Taking the place of mothers. Lakhu, taken, translation is better, usurped the place of mothers. We had a loving mama, a loving baba, who took care of us, who fed us, who cuddled us, who played with us. And now we have these terrible women who are just pushing us around, telling us to shut up and stop crying. Oy. Cherdas yonkim ha'pa'utos b'mokom chalav eim. They have, how does he translate it? Tautened their tendons with the false death. All right. Cherdas yonkim ha'pa'utos. I would say the fear of these sucklings, these babies, these little babies, instead of the milk of mother. Od esmol karvola hamimam, was just yesterday that the mother was close to them. Es hashena ki yerach lavon, when they experienced the moon, the shining moon at night. Ulitzidam od hoisa habuba balas halachayim. All right. there was still the little doll, the Buba. We still had a little doll with the cheeks, with the beautiful cheeks. Because each of them had little dolls, little toy dolls, which had red cheeks. But the red cheeks were no longer red. She'odmam, the redness of the cheeks, yorad, came off, was wiped away, meirov nishikot biyad achat. With one hand, was wiped away. We kissed this doll. These are kids clinging to the doll, kissing it, in the process, slobbering all over it, washing away the redness from the cheeks of the dolls. It's interesting, the translation here is, there was a doll with cheeks deruged. That's an interesting verb. The redness was taken away, deruged, by kisses in one arm. They had it in one arm. And what did they have in the other arm? If in one arm they had a doll, the hadubi, they had a little teddy bear. Shekvar nitnu lo chayim al yedei ahava. This stuffed pet, this dubi, this teddy bear that they had, was given life by love. A little child experiences the dolly or the panda that they're holding as a living creature. I don't go. I have a little great granddaughter, Kanara Ella, who doesn't go anywhere without her baby dolly and her panda, because they're living to her. She gave them life, and then she clings to them. It's only natural. It's what the psychologists call a transitional object. V'hayom nosheves ruach hamoves. Now, the only thing that's alive is the wind of death, the wind of dying, the wind of death. Nosheves me'al l'sa'oroth. It's the wind of death, the breeze, the chill coming through the windows of this cell in which they're in. It's blowing the hair, blows the shifts over their hair. Asher ishlo yisadron shuv. This hair was never going to be combed, never going to be combed again. They're all fated to die. This powerful poem speaks about the 2 million children who were part of the 6 million Jews who were killed in the Holocaust, and of course has contemporary relevance too. All the images we've seen of what Hamas did on October 7th to infants, to babies, in front of their parents' eyes. In this poem, as horrible as it is, the parents are already gone. It's the kids all alone. But to do the brutalities, to burn alive, to stab in front of parents, mothers and fathers, infants, children, to shoot them, it's beyond. And these are the memories, the images that we have to think about on Tisha B'Av, so that we are yadi hani bahani, so that we know and experience and feel the difficulties, the pains, the horrors, the terrors of everything we mourn on Tisha B'Av, from Yosef's tears to the tears of today. I've tried to give you readings to read along with me, like the poem we just read together by Nellie Sachs. It's certainly very moving and is a Kinot in its own right. Let's do one of the Kinots from the book. Not the Kinot from the day, but the Kinot from last night, the night before Tisha B'Av. And we'll look at Kinot number 5, which is on pages 61 and 60. Page 61 is the Hebrew. Page 60 is the English translation. And what's interesting is there's a totally parentheses. The translation is my words. I translated it. But I translated it probably 10, 12 years ago. And now as I look at the translation, I criticize myself. I could have done better translating it. So when you see me translating it, sometimes I won't follow my own translation because I've kind of thought about it for the past few years and have changed it. But in all seriousness, let's turn to one of the actual Kinos. This is one of the Kinos written by Rabbi Elazar HaKalir, the famous Mikonen, the master of Lamentations. And it continues and develops the theme of crying, of tears, and the power of tears. And the refrain begins, Ad ono b'chia b'tzion. Let's read this together. You can catch up with me because omit certain lines and move a little quicker. But this Kinot is a very important one. And we want to read some, and we'll read several more of the actual Kinos together. Adono b'chiya v'tzion. How long must Zion cry, umispaid b'Yerushalayim, and Jerusalem mourn? Terachem Zion, God, this is already a pasuk in Tehillim, have pity upon Zion, v'sivneh chomos Yerushalayim, and rebuild the walls of Yerushalayim. The poet then goes on, the Mekonen. Mekonen means the lamenter, the one issuing these laments. Strikes a theme here, and it's the theme of I would call it the cosmic significance of the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. The Beis HaMikdash was not just a local event. The temple was destroyed in Jerusalem, and when you lived in London or in Passaic or in Ecuador, you didn't have to think about it. It had its effects across the entire world, not only in Earth, but beyond Earth, to the stars, the planets in heaven, the zodiac signs. It extended everywhere. And this sounds like a miraculous, poetic, mystical theme. The events that happen in Yerushalayim go all over the world. But the Jewish people know that there are things that happen to the Jewish people in Yerushalayim, or in Eretz Yisrael, or in the neighboring countries to Eretz Yisrael, that immediately become concerns and impact the rest of the world. So look what happened on October 7th. The whole world is involved one way or the other, pro-Israel, anti-Israel, etc. There's something cosmic, universal about anything that happens just to the Jews. We're not, quote, just a little people, somehow whatever happens to the Jews, it spreads all over the place. The Churban Beis HaMikdash was the same. It had ramifications all over the world and all over the solar system, all over the universe. And that's part of the theme of this particular Kinot, which makes it so powerful. And the first lines are, Oz b'chato'enu chorav mikdosh, uva'avonoseinu nisraf hechal. Let's remember this, and I already began this theme. To some extent, this suffering is our fault, and we have to really look internally. And here too, it's because of our sins, b'chato'enu, the sanctuary was destroyed. Uva'avonoseinu nisraf hechal. It's because of our sins that the temple was burned. It's not just an external enemy who perpetuated whatever they perpetuated, whether it's this destruction of the temple years and years and years ago, or whether it's current events. We have to look inwardly. It's our fault. We neglected to see certain signs. We didn't deal properly. We weren't properly prepared. And morally, ethically too, we have to examine our failures because we believe that our behavior affects the consequences that we experience. And if our behavior is not in line with what it should be, we could expect disaster. And if you want to avoid disaster, you better think of what you can do now to avoid it and to get not only not disaster, but to get blessing and plenty and true peace. Be'eretz chuber lo koshro mispaid utzuvo hashomayim nosu kino. This is the cosmic influence. Jerusalem's heavenly counterpart are arranged to mourn, while the stars in the sky lamented. Tzuvo hashomayim nosu kino. This is the cosmic impact of the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. Gam bochu b'merer shiftei Yaakov v'yaf mazolos yizlu dimo. Jacob's tribes wept bitterly. What does it mean? At the time of the destruction of even the first temple, the tribes of Israel were long, long gone. Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, etc., Yosef, Benjamin, all had passed away centuries before. But from their heavenly abode, wherever they are, in Olam Haba, even the Yeshivotim, the tribes crying along, was the cosmic effect goes even to the world to come, to people who are long dead, our grandparents, great-grandparents, our ancestors going back hundreds, thousands of years, cry along with us today over the pogroms of recent times, over the Holocaust, over the tragedies throughout history. They're crying along with us. Bachu b'merer shiftei Yaakov v'af mazolos yizlu. And let's get back to the mazolos, to the constellations, the zodiac signs, the stars in the heavens. They all drip tears. We could skip a few lines for now. He'etiru avos, right? Our forefathers, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Sora, Rivka, Rochel, Beleah, Rochel mevako al baneh. Rochel was crying. He'etiru avos v'eil kalosha meah. But God would not even hear the prayers of our forefathers. And imagine the prayers not of our forefathers or ancestral mothers going back to Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah, but our grandparents, our great-grandparents. They care for us wherever they are in another world. They still care for us. They still suffer along with us as they rejoice in our joys. But at this time, when the temples were destroyed, God didn't listen even to them. So'akuvonim v'lo ona'ov. What a powerful poetic phrase that is. The children wailed, tsoaku, they wailed, but Father, lo ona'ov, Father did not respond. Going down to the end of the page, Akrov is Scorpio, the scorpion, which is one of the constellations in the solar system. Akrov lovash pachadur oda. Even Scorpio, the month of Cheshvan, corresponds to the constellation Scorpio. So, as I put in my parentheses there, Scorpio, corresponding to the month of Cheshvan, was overcome with fear and shuddering. Pachadur oda. Ki v'cherev u'v'ra'ov shifatonu tzurenu. Because the protector himself, Tsurenu, our rock, our protector, the Lord, God, Rebbeinu Shalom himself, capital P, capital H, protector himself, condemned us to sword and hunger. B'cherev u'v'ra'ov. Palgei mayim horidu dimo kanachal. Our eyes overflowed with streams of tears. Notice the constant emphasis upon tears and crying. Ki os ba'keshes lo nitan lanu. Sagittarius, which corresponds to the month of Kislev, was the Keshes. Keshes is a bow, a rainbow. Lo nitan lanu. That was denied for us. We were denied from that. And if we can go to the last two lines on page 63, the last two lines in the Hebrew, for the letter Shin and the letter Tuf, Shochachnu Shabbos belibos shovovim. We ignore the Shabbos with our wayward hearts. Here we're confessing our sins. We didn't treat the Shabbat, the Shabbos, properly. We treated it like wayward children, like wayward hearts. Shabbos, okay, big deal. Maybe I'll take a long nap. I'll go for a walk, and I'll have a little schnapps, and I'll take it easy, and I'll read the latest magazines, etc. That's not the way to spend Shabbos. And we confess, Shochachnu Shabbos belibos shovovim, wayward hearts. Shaddai shikach tzol kol tzidkosenu. If we forget the Shabbos, God forgets us. So he ignored whatever merits we had. Tekaneh l'tzion kina gadola. But every kina ends on a note of hope. We'll speak soon more about hope. But here you have this terrible kina, which sees so much sorrow, so much disaster, so much suffering, so many tears throughout the entire poem, and it ends to Kaneh l'tzion kina gadola. You will one day again take up Tzion, Zion's cause, with zeal, with kina. Kina here means the sense of zealousness, like a kanoi, with great enthusiasm. God, you will wake up and take up Zion's cause. V'so'ir l'rabosi ma'or nokecha. And once more, you will illuminate the populous city with the light of your splendor. V'so'ir, you will illuminate l'rabosi This is the first phrase of Eicha. Eicha yoshva v'adod ha'ir rabosi once populous city, the once populous nation, the once populous Yerushalayim, the once populous north of Israel, which now is desolate and subject to forest fires, and it doesn't even seem to be part of the country anymore. It's a no man's land, and the settlements on the border of Gaza, they're all abandoned or certainly desolate and missing. They're no longer a Rabbosayam, they're no longer thriving with people, but you will illuminate that darkness with the light of your splendor. That's an important Kinot to say, to recite it, not the tears. There's another kind of Kinot, not in the book. Frankly, I've seen some Kinos that were written already about the October 7th to be recited on Tisha B'Av. To my mind, and it's my own personal opinion, and maybe I'm wrong, it's too soon to write a Kinah. You cannot write a Kinah when the story's not quite over. You know, the story we're in now it's not over by a long shot. And it's too soon to write a Kinah. You can't mourn something until you have a certain perspective, the perspective of time. Even the Kinos which were written about the Holocaust were not written immediately after the Holocaust. It took some years of moving forward from the Holocaust that people began to write Kinos about it. But what we can do is look at some of the obituaries written about some of the victims, the soldiers who were defending the state of Israel and the Jewish people at this time. So if you look in the sources, number 8, I give you here 2 links. One is a link to an obituary, which we'll go to. I'll ask you to click on it momentarily. And the other is a musical memorial. The person who is the subject of this obituary was a soldier named Amitai Granot. He was a tank commander and he was killed in his tank. He was the son of Rav Tamir Granot, who was the Rosh Yeshiva in the yeshiva in Tel Aviv called Orot Shaul. Rabbi Granot Sr. and his son, Hashem Yinkom Damav, were both musically inclined. And they loved singing the songs, Hasidic tunes, especially the tunes of Modjitz and the tunes of Ben Zion Shenker. And so, soon after the Shloshim, the 30 days of mourning for Amitai, the family and the yeshiva that Rabbi Granot heads got together with Yonatan Razel, a singer in Israel, and sang various songs, appropriate songs, mourning and yet moving forward from the death of this precious young man. And that musical memorial is available to you in source number 8, item link number 2, the musical memorial. Because today is Tisha B'Av, I didn't think it was appropriate to have instrumental music during this program, but it's something you can go to when it's appropriate. But we certainly can look at the obituary that Mrs. Rachel Sylvester included on a news station, which you can go to with one click. And I just want to touch base with part of her masterful obituary. The headline, this appears in the Arutz Sheva, Amitai Granot, HYD, Hashem Yinkom Damav, the tank commander who loved to play the piano. So this is a boy, really early 20s, who was a soldier in the Israeli army and killed in the early days of the war. As she writes, Mrs. Rachel Silvetsky, the story of a gentle yeshiva scholar who decided to take a tank commander's course to help defend his country. He chose the training of being a tank commander. In the days prior to his death, his tank killed 15 terrorists, took part in several battles, and eliminated 2 jeeps. This is a picture of this young man. You can kind of get a sense of who he was. His smile, his entire visage, the way he looks, type of person he is, with his kippah sruga on his head, and his uniform, his Big Day Malchus, his Big Day Milchama. And he was recently engaged, we learned, to a young woman named Rani Levinson on the first day of Chol HaMoed, just days before the tragedy. 4 days later, he reported for reserve duty. On Thursday, immediately after Sukkot, the Shabbat of Simchas Torah, his tank was moved to a community located in the area bordering Lebanon, and within a day, the tankists were battling Hezbollah. And the story goes on about him. He's one of 7 children born to Avivit and Rabbi Tamir Granot, Rosh Yeshiva of Orot Shaul, Hesder in Tel Aviv. He grew up in the Golan. He went on to post-high school yeshiva in Beit Shan, and loved to be in the north, where he was destined to die. And here's a picture of his father and him and his mother. Now, obviously still in deep, deep grief and bereavement. He went to speak to his Rosh Yeshiva, Rabbi Zucker, who suggested he remain in the yeshiva and study Gemara Be'iyun, because he felt that this sensitive, music-loving student was more suited for intellectual pursuits than for being an officer. But he didn't want that. And as one of his friends said, he reminded me of David HaMelech, of King David, who led Israel to victory, but played the harp, a soldier and a musician, and yet King David. And here I have probably the last picture taken of him, courtesy of the family, standing with the background of the hills of Lebanon behind him. And it closes, Amitai died as bravely as he lived. He was the commander at Har Dov, which is way up north in Israel near Lebanon. And he spoke of his desire to build a home that would be their personal haven. Tens of thousands watched and listened to his funeral, and thousands stood with him on Har Herzl, on Mount Herzl, the military cemetery where he was buried. And his father cried out, his father Rav Tamir cried out, Ribono Shel Olam, how can it be that in your world, a Jewish child born and raised in Eretz Yisrael, whose grandfather said, raise this child for his father and mother at his brit, how has he fallen? My son, you died to sanctify God's name. Remember, we said that those who are Haruge Malchus, killed by the enemy, are in the highest mechitza in the world to come. Strong lights are shining, we're broken, but the Jewish people will win, and God has given, God has taken, may God's name be blessed. And may all the Jewish people be blessed by those rays of lights. I encourage you, as the note says, to watch the other link that I provided to you of Rav Tamir Granot and the students of his Hesder Yeshiva Orot Shaul singing Mimkomcha, Nigun Babin Sion Schenker, with singer Yonatan Razel in Amitai's memory. Here you have a picture of Razel, and the background, the white shirt and the gray beard, is his father singing along and playing an instrument along 30 plus days after his son was killed, because of the lessons of Mimkomcha Malkeinu Sophia. I thought I'd share this with you as a kinot. It's a kinot no less than any of the kinos that are printed in the Kinos booklet. Moving along, we recited kinot number 5. We read together an obituary of Amitai Granot, Gibor Yisrael, Hashem Yinkom Damav. So we're familiar now with tears. We have plenty to cry about. I want to say just a line or two from the Gemara Maseches Brachos, Daf Lamed Beis, Amud Beis, page 32b, Maseches Brachos. The limits of prayer. The Gemara there quotes several statements by Rabbi Loza. And among the statements of Rabbi Loza is one that reads as follows. Kishechor v'Yerushalayim. When the Beis HaMikdash Yerushalayim was destroyed, Ninalu sha'orei tefillah. The gates of prayer were closed. Prayer is blocked. Avol, but sha'orei dema'ot lo ninalu. The gates of tears were not closed. So even when the gates to prayer are blocked, there's an obstruction separating us from the Almighty. And we can't get through with our prayers no matter how sincere they are. But we can still get through with tears. It's such a powerful lesson about the power of tears, which I've been emphasizing today. On Tisha B'Av especially, we read in Megillas Eicha the pasuk which says that our prayers are blocked today. Are blocked. Sakosa, God, you have made a sukkah. You've made a ceiling, an overhang, blocking our prayers. And therefore, on Tisha B'Av we pray, but somehow we feel, as we read in the recent Kinot that we read together, God's not listening. And on Tisha B'Av we're deprived too of another tool. Besides the tool of prayer, we also have the tool of Torah study. But on Tisha B'Av, we're not permitted to study Torah. We're only permitted to study the kinds of things we've been studying this morning together. Things which are sad, tragic, and which force us to cry. That's permitted. But otherwise, the Torah which makes us happy, Kudei Hashem Yeshodei Misamchei Leiv, we have no access to that simcha, to that channel of Torah. Tefillah, Torah, both blocked today. There's a cloud between us and the one above, the man above, the person above, Ribono Shel Olam. But we can get through that barrier with tears. Sha'arei dima, sha'arei dumaot. The gates of tears, lo ninalu, are not blocked, are not closed off. No barrier. That's the Gemara. I came across recently, and in the booklet you can find the exact place to look for this article. An article in a psychology journal. The name of the journal is Professional Psychology. Research and Applications. That's the name of the journal. It's a professional journal. And in a very recent issue, which has not yet been printed, but is available online, and you could get on it if you want to read the article yourself, a team of psychotherapists discuss the importance of tears in psychotherapy. Because the field of psychology, since its beginnings, 100 or so years ago, has begun to learn some of the lessons which we've been taught hundreds, centuries, millennia ago. And one of them is the power of tears. I know when I was in training as a psychotherapist, we were taught that if a patient or a client begins to cry in the middle of a session, make sure you have a box of tissues nearby and pass the tissues to the client so that he or she can wipe away the tears. That's wrong. If you're a therapist, you don't want to wipe away the tears. You want the tears to come. The tears are an important sign. Tears are a sign that a breakthrough can happen. Tears can wash away mourning and grief to a certain extent. Tears can allow you to break through to new heights. Tears are important. And the entire article suggests ways, techniques that therapists can use. Don't pass the tissues to the patient who's crying, to the client who's crying, to the person you're working with. No, say, I see you crying. Feel comfortable crying here. If you really feel like crying, cry. Cry away. And when it's appropriate, what did the tears mean? What did the tears awaken in you? Do you want to cry some more? And perhaps a session or two later, remember a couple of sessions ago you were crying? Have you cried again since? Are those, whatever you were crying about, is that still with you? How is it still with you? Encourage her or him to cry some more, to cry if necessary. Crying can be therapeutic. A powerful lesson, and it's now a lesson available in a major prestigious psychology journal in the year 2024. And we're learning about it in so many ways today. The psychological benefits of tears, professional reflections. There's such a beautiful medrash in Eicha Rabbah. The pasuk says near the very beginning of Megillas Eicha, B'chos yivkeh balayla, cry, cry twice. B'chos yivkeh, cry, cry, balayla, at night. The medrash tells a story. There are many different versions of this story. The story is that Rabbi Gamliel had a neighbor, a woman, probably a widow, who lost her two sons, Tashchores. Tashchores, al tiruni shani shecharchores. There's an expression, it was an expression in the old days, I don't know if it's still proper. Black is beautiful. Black is beautiful. And African Americans, black people would assert black is beautiful. Well, that phrase, black is beautiful, originates in the Bible, in Shir HaShirim. It's a phrase in Shir HaShirim where the lover says to the beloved, the male lover in the dialogue says to his beloved woman, Al tirauni she'ani shechachores. Do not fear me just because I am black. And the accurate translation is not don't fear me although I am black, but don't fear me because shechora ani v'nova, I am black and beautiful, benos Yerushalayim, daughters of Jerusalem. So we find this many times in the Talmud and the Midrashic literature that black hair, a strong tan man is a sense of vigor and strength. So she lost two sons, this woman, the neighbor of Rabbi Gamliel. Two sons, perhaps she lost them at war. And they were both Tashchores, they were both dark, tall, dark, and handsome. And every night she would cry all night. And Rabbi Gamliel would hear her cry. There were two versions of this medrash. One version is that he cried along with her. And the other version is he cried along with her and then began to cry about the temple that was destroyed. So her tears, which he heard at nighttime, daytime, she was obviously busy with other matters. At night she cried and cried. And Rabbi Gamliel cried along with her. It's such a poignant image that the Medrash conjures with this image. And it's based upon the Pasuk. It's the second Pasuk in Megillas Eicha. B'chos yivkeh, when did the tears come? Balayla, at night. And of course, it doesn't take much to think of the night as not just being the night time, but night being times which are dark, difficult times, whether it's high noon or midnight. There are difficult times which encourage crying. In fact, I noticed Malbim points out that the word Laila, night, is related to the word Yelola, which means wailing, tears, bursting, crying. Night is a time for crying. That's the time for crying. And one should allow one's tears to rise to the surface. I'm going to wax personal because in past years I've often invited others to speak about someone close to them who they lost. We had some time ago Rabbi Robinson of the Lincoln Square Synagogue speak about his mentor, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, Zecher Tzadik Livrocha. We once had Dr. Josh Lamb, the son of Rabbi and Mrs. Norman Lamb, who eulogized his parents as part of this presentation. I'd like to take advantage of the opportunity to speak about some people close to me, to speak very briefly about each of them, and shed a tear or two for them. Number one, in terms of his age and position in world politics, is Senator Joseph Lieberman, Olav HaSholom. Senator Joseph Lieberman was a senator in Connecticut, a man with vast political experience, a gentle but very wise person who really was able to get along with, as they say, both sides of the aisle, Democrats, Republicans, etc., and who was a candidate for the vice presidency of the United States. First Jew to be in that position, possible vice president. They lost the election. But he was also not only a Jew, but an Orthodox Jew, an observant Orthodox Jew, a Shomer Torah u'mitzvos. And I knew him in various capacities. I was privileged to be asked by the Orthodox Union to attend the funeral of Senator Lieberman's mother, the old Mrs. Lieberman, who was his model, his religious model. This was a woman in Stamford, Connecticut, who realized it was then a small Jewish community. There was no mikveh tahara. And she realized that in order to go to the mikveh from Stamford, Connecticut, you had to get into the car and drive south, I don't know how many miles exactly, but it probably would take a good couple of hours, to the Bronx, where there were mikvaot, and there to keep the mitzvos of Taharas HaMishpacha. So she began to lobby in the community. We can't do this, because not every woman is going to be interested enough and committed enough to drive 2 hours to go to the mikveh in the Bronx. We have to have a mikveh locally in Stamford. And she dedicated herself to raising the funds, starting the mikveh, and of course, attendance in the mikveh rose threefold within several weeks after the new mikveh in Stamford was available to local women. And that image, I was at the funeral of this noble woman. The funeral was held in the synagogue in Stamford because she was such a righteous woman and such an influence in the community, Latov, that they felt it was appropriate to bring her coffin into the shul, something which is done only for very special people. I often think that she was his model. She was Senator Joseph Lieberman's model. And he passed on the religion that he observed so carefully to his daughter, Hani Lowenstein, who actually works for the Orthodox Union for the Jewish Learning Initiative on Campus program. Wonderful woman and a wonderful young son-in-law to Joe Lieberman. The image I can't get out of my head about Joe Lieberman. I had many chances to talk to him, etc., and I want to recommend his books. He wrote a book about observance, Shabbos observance, which is available through OU Press. I suggest you use that book for yourselves and for people that you want to expose to the beauty of Shabbos observance. But what the picture in front of my mind's eye is when he was in the Senate, and perhaps possibly still when he was vice president, participating in government affairs in the Capitol, he would go to shul Shabbos morning, walk to shul from the Capitol, and walk to shul. The shul, Kesher Yisrael Kesher, is a shul, an Orthodox shul, not too far from the Capitol, but a long walk. He wouldn't drive to shul. Wouldn't take advantage of the Secret Service giving him a ride. He would walk to shul, not carrying, because there was then no Eruv around the capital of the United States and the shul in Georgetown. But he was escorted by Secret Service people. They were in the car behind him, and they would drive slowly, and he would walk all the way When he got close to the shul, people realized who he was, and they started gathering around him, etc. And he would come to shul, say to everyone, Good Shabbos, sit modestly in his seat, start to daven, listen to Kriyas HaTorah. And I was a guest speaker of one of those Shabbosos, and was privileged to see that whole entourage of his walking from the capital, walking to the shul, participating in shul, just like another member of the congregation. He had a lot to teach us on many levels, and all I could say here is we should shed a tear about his loss. In today's complicated political world, he would have been a shining star. Yehi zichro baruch, may his memory be a blessing. I want to also mention, here we get closer to home, literally, my dear brother-in-law, Chavi's brother, Yossi, as we knew him, Yosef Yisrael Taub, Zichrono Livrocha, was younger than Chavi, and he passed away of serious complications, pancreatic cancer, within the past year. Outside his 21st day of Elul, not too far away. Yossi was a very, very special person, a special brother, a special son to his parents, my in-laws, Aleha Mashalom. A businessman in the diamond business who was known for his integrity, his honesty, his fairness, his eagerness to please. But a person who was really never left the world of yeshiva, was always learning Gemara. Time late, toward the end of his life, he stopped going into the office, stopped going into the diamond center, and spent time learning with Chavrusa, learning as part of a kollel, going to the shiurim of the Rabbanim he loved to hear. He loved to hear the shiurim of Rav Hersh Shechter Shlita, and of course of many others shiurim that he went to. He's a very, very special person. He wrote a sefer called Dorshei Rishumot. It was a sefer in which he writes about gematria, the whole subject of gematria. And gematria, it's interesting because his grandfather, Chavi's grandfather, my wife's grandfather, my children's ancestor, was a Modzitzer Rebbe, the Imre Shol, Reb Shol Yedidia Loza Taub, who was an ardent visitor of Tzion. He was an Ohev Tzion, a Zionist, member of the Yakudas Arabonim, and the highest levels of the rabbinate, as well as being a famous Hasidic Rebbe and poet. But he visited Israel several times, Eretz Yisrael several times in the 1930s. And once when he returned to Poland, to Otwock, near Warsaw, where he had his court, he returned and he started saying in his Torahs, in his Vertlach, in his speeches, his droshes, he started using gematrios, arithmetic cheshbonos. This word is this number means that, etc., which was not his custom usually. And suddenly he began to do that. And I asked him, why did the Rebbe all of a sudden changing from his usual way of giving Torah to the Hasidim and change into gematria and going into all these numerical cheshbonot? So he would say, we learned that gematrios are parparos lechochma. A gematria is like a plaything. It's like almost like a toy, like a game, but it's a parperes. It's like a delightful dessert to chochma. Chochma is wisdom. So this is a dessert. After you have wisdom, which is true intellectual wisdom, then you can kind of play with these numerical little manipulations, and you come to some interesting little idea, and that's kind of dessert after the big meal of the steak and potatoes of learning. And you have gematrios. Gematrios is chochma. I just returned, the Rebbe would say, from my visit to Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael, Gemara says, is avira de Eretz Yisrael machkim. The atmosphere of Eretz Yisrael, the atmosphere of the land of Israel says chochma, wisdom. Wisdom is to be found in the land of Israel. So I left Israel now. So I no longer have the chochma, the wisdom of Israel, but I can have the dessert. The dessert is gematrios, which are parparos lechochma. So I'm saying over things which are desserts, kind of, remembering the wisdom that I had, the special wisdom of Eretz Yisrael. There are many lessons in that little vort, but Yossi was enthralled by gematrios, and nowadays you can use a computer and figure out all kinds of combinations and permutations of various Hebrew words. And he wrote a book about that, a sefer called Dorshei Reshumot, which is available and highly recommended. He was a grandfather, a great-grandfather, a wonderful husband to his wife and widow, to Shendi. She should be well and be strong. And I just felt I need to cry a little bit about Yossi. And what's wrong with crying at this opportunity when I'm trying to urge so many of you, whoever's watching and will watch this, get in touch with the tears. Get in touch with your tears. Get in touch with what you have to cry about. And we all, these days, and all days, have things to cry about. I also want to mention a cousin of mine, Rabbi Weinreb, Rabbi Kalman Weinreb, who passed away after suffering for a long time, very serious ailments, one after the other. He was a Rabbi. He was a teacher of the 10th grade in Yeshivas Ner Yisrael in Baltimore, Rav Kalman Weinreb. Not only was he the teacher of the 10th grade and a loyal husband to his wife Devorah, may she be well, and to his wonderful, wonderful children. He was a teacher of the 10th grade in Ner Yisrael for over 50 years. He was Baltimore born and Baltimore bred. He went to the school called TA, Chafetz Chaim of Baltimore, and straight after high school went to Yeshivas Ner Yisrael and never left the campus of Ner Yisrael. He lived there for most of his married life on the campus of Ner Yisrael. His world was that campus. His world was his many, many students. Imagine teaching for over 50 years, and every year he has 20, 30, 40 boys in his class, 10th graders, and these 10th graders are now 60 years old, 50 years old, 40 years old, thousands of them, and all remember him. He taught the yeshiva Shemesechta, whatever it happened to be, Bava Kama, Bava Metzi, and the Dorim Ksuvis, whatever. But he also insisted that the boys learn Bakius, learn not the typical analytic mode, but just learn to cover ground, all of Maseches Brachos. For 50 years, he studied and taught, 50 plus years, studied and taught Maseches Brachos until he knew it, like most of us know, Ashrei Oshrei Veisecha. And his students, who I meet sometimes in all sorts of places, oh, your name is Weinreb, are you related to Kalman Weinreb? And I could proudly say, he was my first cousin, my uncle, we called him Uncle Izzy. His name was Yisrael, his son, his oldest son. When I speak about Kalman had many times offers to become a rabbi, to become the head of a yeshiva, the various offers to leave the yeshiva in Ner Yisrael. No, he stayed in that role. And I came across some time ago a teaching of Rav Schwab, Rav Shimon Schwab, Zeichet Tzadik Levrocha. He wrote a book on prayer, which I suggest to you. It's a power of prayer, or however it's translated into English. But in Hebrew, it's called Iyun Tefillah. There's several works called Iyun Tefillah. His is one of them, Iyun Tefillah. And there he comments on this phrase in Shemona Esrei. We say, Al tzadikim vel chasidim v'aziknei asher samcha beis Yisrael v'al pleitas sofreihem, or v'al pleitas beis sofreihem. We pray for the righteous, etc. We pray for the zakenim, the elders, and we also pray for the pleitas sofreihem, the remnant of the great scribes. So who are the remnant of the great scribes? Who's the remnant? So people would say survivors of the Holocaust, people who went through all sorts of hardships and they were in exile in Siberia and they somehow were saved. These are the pleitas sofreihem. Rabbi Schwab would say, no, the pleitas sofreihem are those young men and young women who early in their lives, in their early 20s, commit themselves and devote themselves to teaching children, not to becoming great Rosh Yeshivas and saying shiurim to adults or to young marrieds or to older youngsters, but rather the ones who teach the second grade, the fourth grade, the sixth grade, the lower grades of high school, who teach them, and to devote their lives to do that. And devoting one's life to doing that means a life of deprivation. You're not going to get rich teaching fourth grade. You're not going to get rich teaching 10th grade. And there's no special glory in it. No one's going to make a special, call you up to the chuppah, harav hagoyin hagodol rav somebody. No. You're going to be modest. You're going to be, you'll have a salary, but you're not going to be wealthy. You're not going to be influential. You're not going to be powerful, but you will influence young children. Kalman was chief among these poletas sofreim. He devoted himself to being a polit, to removing himself from the rest of society, from the competitive world, from the business world, from the politics of Jewish education, and just to focus on young boys, 14, 15, 16 years old. This was his glory, and tears come to my eyes as I think of him and what more he had to offer the world of chinuch, the world of education, the world of 10th graders, which is a very, very important world. Of Common Weinreb, all of us shalom. We read many kinos, but only one kino from the traditional kina book. Hopefully in this edition. When the OU, together with Koren Publishers, decided to issue this Kinot Misoret Torav, a translation of the Kinot, new translation of the Kinot, then 10, 12 years ago, and the Kinot with Rav Soloveitchik's comments interwoven into the explanation of each Kinot, we were faced with a bit of a dilemma. I mentioned before that, of course, people have already started to write kinos for the events of October 7th, but personally I feel it's too soon for that. But there was also a debate subsequent to the Holocaust. Can we write kinos for the Holocaust? And who can write them? And can we recite them in public? There are many who said, yes, we must write a kino. And some of them, I mentioned the name Rav Schwab, he wrote a kino. The Rebbe, the Chassidish Rebbe, Zecher Tzadik Livrocha, wrote a kino. And others wrote kinos. Rav Soloveitchik personally felt that we were not adequate to write a kino and to make this kino into, well, this is what we say in memory of the Holocaust. We weren't great enough. We didn't have the authority, the halachic authority, or the religious authority to declare this is the kina which we recite. And of course, within the Orthodox Union, we revere, we have some of the Talmidim Muvhakim, the especially close Talmidim of Rav Soloveitchik, Rabbi Shechter, Rabbi Genack, and others who knew him so well and were so close to him. How could we stand behind publishing an edition of the kinos which would have kinos upon the Holocaust when Rav Soloveitchik himself was against such kinos being included in the formal Tisha B'Av services? Eventually, we did choose 4 kinos because we felt so many people will be looking for kinos on the Holocaust. Why not choose 4 of them, a sample of them, and include them, and write in the notes, in the introductory notes, that Rav Soloveitchik himself didn't look favorably upon new kinos referring to the Holocaust. So among the 4 kinos that we have, and here we're jumping from a kino we said last night about tears and about the constellations, to a kino for the Holocaust. And it's Kinot number 49 in your book. Kinot number 49 is on page 629 and 628, the Hebrew on 629, the English on 628. It goes on for several pages after that. This Kinot actually was my own personal suggestion for inclusion. It was written by a poet, not by a rabbi, but by a poet who was a devout, observant Jew. His name was Yehuda Leib Bialer, and he wrote a Kinot to the tune and to the meter, in the poetic sense, of Eli Tzion V'Yoreha, with which we will conclude today's session. So it's a musical chant based upon that ancient chant. And I just want to encourage you to read this along with me and give yourself time, perhaps press a pause button or something here and there, to give yourself time to read and to read the translation of the entire Kinot. I just want to give you a sample of it and say it in the tune that it was meant to be recited according to that tune. Eli, Eli, nafshi b'chi, v'za'aki bas Yisrael, mispaid si'i v'hisyapchi, ochlo ha'esh b'Yisrael. Eli, Eli means lament, lament. Cry, cry, oi, oi. Nafshi, my soul, b'chi, cry, cry, b'chi. So that fits with the theme here of crying. V'za'aki bas Yisrael, and mourn, O daughter of Israel. Mispaid si'i v'hisyapchi. In eulogy, mispaid, hesped, eulogy. Si'i v'hisyapchi, howls of grief. Howls, H-O-W-L-S. V'hisyapchi means to howl in tears. Why? Ochlo ha'esh b'Yisrael, for the flames have consumed Israel. What a powerful way this is to begin a Kinot for the Holocaust, and how apt these words are for the current difficulties that we face. Flames have consumed Israel. Literally, one of the biggest problems which face us right now are the fires, the forest fires, the fires in the north, the fires in the so-called West Bank. Some of them are triggered because of the unusual heat this summer. Some of them are arsons, and some of them are the results of enemy attacks of rockets and drones and whatnot. But remember, this is a Kinot not just for now, but a Kinot for the Holocaust. Al tevach am asher huchan, yisurei shechol ashtos domim, zokein gam taf lo rucham, al akedah korban tomim. Al tevacham has an English word which has become quite famous these days, properly misused often, for the genocide, tevacham, slaughtering an entire nation. Asher huchan, so carefully planned. This tevacham, the Holocaust, and the more recent tevacham, was very carefully planned. Yisurei shechol, pangs of grief. Shechol I would translate now, not grief, but bereavement. Ki shechol shecholti. Pains, the pangs of bereavement. Imagine the many, many widows, parents, siblings, children, orphaned and widowed, that exist at this very moment in our midst. Ashtos domim, cascades of blood. Zokein gam taf lo rucham. None were spared, not old, not young. No difference. Look at the hostages, the holy hostages, the ones that are still kept hostage. Just recently we learned of the death in captivity of some of them and of people who were quite old, well into their 70s, as well as young children, less than a year old, all in this akedah, this korban tomim, the sacrifice of the innocent. Al ololim gemulei chalav, for the newborn babes, for the nursing infants. hamrutoshim lefitzurim, which are crushed and dismembered against the cruel stones. These images are from the Holocaust, but they're also images of October 7th. V'al domom asher zov, and for the blood that flowed in the streets, Barosh chutzos le'ein horim, as helpless parents looked on in defeat. Can you imagine what it means to watch your child slaughtered, literally slaughtered, in front of your eyes? I mean, it's just unimaginable. But these are scenes from the Holocaust and also scenes from October 11th, October 7th. Al hakehilot hashomemot, for the generations that were cut down. This was the great tragedy of the Holocaust. Imagine what could have been if these 6 million Jews were alive and well today. They would have established families of children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren to a number much larger than 6 million, perhaps even 60 million at this point in time. Imagine a world of 60 million more Jews than there are today. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Entire communities wiped away. V'al churban mikdashei, and all the various temples, there's various synagogues and yeshivos, by the hundreds, by the thousands. You go to Treblinka today to visit the camp of Treblinka, you'll see 10,000 stones, each stone engraved with a name of a shtetl, of a community that was wiped out in the Holocaust. 10,000 communities. Mikdashei, Yukudei lahav shalhavos orei pe'er b'Yisrael. In the killing fields of Auschwitz, the furnaces, consumed in flames, in burning pyres, majestic centers of Jewish life. Orei pe'er b'Yisrael. Alei doros asher nigdo'u, for the generations that were cut down. Demei avos al demei vonim, the blood of the fathers with the blood of the sons. Begei Auschwitz tamu gavo'u, in the killing fields of Auschwitz they were expunged. Alei mokdota kifshonim, in the furnaces of the crematoria. These are just the first several stanzas of this poem, of this Kinot. I encourage you to pause for a moment now, to read for yourselves this Kinot, and afterwards we'll continue. Now that you have familiarized yourselves with the Kinot written by Yehuda Leib Biala, the poet, I'd like to share with you, I already shared with you earlier, a poem by Nellie Sachs, who survived the Holocaust and wrote poems about it. She also wrote a verse play called Eli, which kind of goes along with Biala's Eli, Eli. I'd like to introduce you to two other survivors of the Holocaust, both survivors of Auschwitz. Just very briefly, because there's so much to say, but I do want to recommend to you books by these two gentlemen. One is an Italian Jew named Primo Levi. He wrote, among other works, but this is his classic, a book called If This Is a Man? If This Is a Man. He was in Auschwitz for quite some time. And he saw what happened to prisoners in Auschwitz, what they turned into. They were no longer recognizable as human beings. Not physically, not emotionally, not spiritually. They were If This Is a Man. That's the title of his book in English. He wrote, of course, in Italian, his native tongue. It's translated into English as If This Is a Man. This is one edition of that work. It's also been translated into Hebrew as Hazehu Adam. Is this a man? If this is a man. Hazehu Adam. He wrote a poem in introduction of this book, which he wrote, of course, in Italian, but which has been translated into Hebrew and into English. Well, I've had some experience doing translations myself and studying the entire science of translation. There's an old expression, I think it's a Latin expression, that a translator must be a traitor. In other words, no translator can really translate exactly what's written in the original language into the language with which he and his audience is more familiar, because it's just impossible to translate exactly accurately. So it's interesting to me to compare the poems of Levi or of Sachs or of another person I'll introduce you to momentarily. There's just no way of doing it. But I want to give you a little taste of Primo Levi's poem as it's translated into English, and then quickly switch to the Hebrew for effect. All right. Begins in English. You who live safe. He's speaking to us. This is a Holocaust survivor, an alumnus of Auschwitz. You who live safe in your warm houses. You who find, returning in the evening, hot food and friendly faces. Remember, lo yadi hani bahani? We don't appreciate the suffering of people close to us. We don't appreciate their suffering. So he's talking to us. You people, he's speaking in Auschwitz. And he's saying, you who live safe, have warm houses, return home in the evening, hot food and friendly faces. Consider if this is a man. Look at the Auschwitz prisoner. Look at him. You can see now films, videos of Auschwitz prisoners in Auschwitz at the time. Consider if this is a man, Hazehu Adam, who works in the mud, who does not know peace, who fights for a scrap of bread, who dies because of a yes or no. Someone could say, yes, you live. No, you're dead. Consider if this is a woman, Hazehu Isha. Is this a woman without hair and without a name, with no more strength to remember, her eyes empty, her womb cold, like a frog in the winter? Meditate that this came about. I commend these words to you. And then you have in English, carry them in your hearts, at home, in the street, going to bed, rising, repeat them to your children. So this is what he's writing in English translation from his Italian, telling us, non-Auschwitz prisoners who are living in a comfortable place. He's commending these words to you, carve them in your hearts, at home in the street, going to bed, rising, repeat them to your children. Do you know what these words are? Right. V'shinantam osam livnechem, v'dibarta bom, v'shiftecha b'veisecha, v'lechtecha v'derech, uv'shachbecha, uv'kumecha. Right. Those are the words that he's using in the poem. But he's saying them not as Kriya Shema. Hey, say these words of the Kriya Shema over, teach them to your children, teach them where you're walking and where you're going, teach them at night and teach them. No, he's saying, remember us, remember the 6 million. I commend these words to you, carve them in your hearts, v'shinantem osam livnechem, at home, in the street, b'shiftechem b'veisechem v'lechtecha v'derech, going to bed, rising, b'shachbecha v'kumecha. Repeat them to your children. And then he ends in English translation, or if not, and here it gets pretty rough. You have to get ready for these words. If you're not going to remember us, then if you're not going to remember Auschwitz, may your house fall apart. May illness impede you. May your children turn their faces from you. A strong, strong poem by Primo Levi. I just recommend to anyone who wants to really get in touch and shed tears on the Holocaust, Primo Levi's If This Is a Man, or if you prefer in Hebrew translation, Hazehu Adam. There's another person whose book I would recommend. I'm not going to go into this at any length. And that is a man named Jean, you pronounce it like in French, Jean, G-E-A-N, Ameri, A-M-E with an acute accent over the E, R-Y. he wrote a book which translates better. He wrote also actually in German, a little bit in French, but mostly in German. He's a professional writer. Google him, Jean, Jean Amery, Amery. You'll find out about him and his works. One of his works was translated beautifully into Hebrew. I just picked this up recently in a bookstore in Israel. It's called Me'ever Li'ashma U'Lechapara, Beyond Guilt and Forgiveness. His thesis there is that the Nazis are beyond guilt. You can't speak of them as being guilty. You can be guilty of doing a sin. You could be guilty of murder. But how can you speak of guilt? Guilt is a cheap word, inadequate to express genocide, to express the butchering and the burning of millions and millions of people. You can't speak of a guilty Nazi. It's beyond guilt. And as far as forgiveness, he believes beyond forgiveness. In English, the title is much tamer. It's At the Mind's Limits. But still, it's a powerful book, available in translation, of course, as Me'ever Li'ashma L'Chapara, or At the Mind's Limits. Again, these are stimulants for tears about the Holocaust. We move on now to a different focus. I haven't been counting, but perhaps one of you has. How many times so far have we mentioned the simple word Zion, Zion? It's a very powerful word in our religion, and as you can see in our literature, both in Tanakh and in the various Kinos, these days, the whole word Zion, Zion, and Zionism has become quite a popular or infamous word in the entire world. And Zionism has become equated with all sorts of nasty things. And the world is kind of divided into the Zionists and the anti-Zionists. I want to focus especially on this concept of anti-Zionism, which, besides the fact that it's become part of the world's culture, and in some circles it's a big mitzvah to be anti-Zionist, what concerns me is the fact that there are many Jews who call themselves anti-Zionists. There are seminaries, Reform and conservative seminaries, Reconstructionist seminaries, who are puzzled by what do we do with our students, or would-be students, applicants, who declare that they are anti-Zionists. Can we include them into a rabbinical seminary? They're anti-Zionists. And I don't know just how these institutions resolve that question, but there certainly are anti-Zionists in the left of our religion, certainly in the non-Orthodox world. But also if we move away to the right, to the ultra-Orthodox world, so-called ultra-Orthodox world, there are Jews who are anti-Zionists. We see groups at protests and at various gatherings with signs, Judaism is not Zionism. And I would like to assert as strongly as I can that Judaism is Zionism. Judaism and Zionism are identical. Zionism is a necessary component of one's Judaism. And this is apparent in many, many ways. One of the greatest proponents of what today is called Zionism, one who was one of the most ardent and articulate proponents of Zion, of Zionism, was a man who lived long ago named Rabbi Yehuda Halevi. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is called, and actually the Rashba himself lived a little after Yehuda Halevi, calls him the poet, so-called the poet laureate of the Jewish people. And his poetry is astounding, and his personality was astounding. And we're going to turn to two of his compositions, which are included in the Kinos. And they are Kinot number 34, Yom Achpi Hichbadati, and Kinot number 36, Tzion Halo Tishali. But first, let me give you a brief overview of Yehuda Halevi's life and lesson. Yehuda Halevi, I have a biography here about him, which I recommend. It's by Hillel Halkin, entitled Yehuda Halevi. Excellent biography. It describes his entire life. He was both a philosopher. He wrote the book known as the Kuzri or Kuzari, which is one of the basic works of Machshava, of Jewish philosophy, medieval Jewish philosophy. He wrote it in Arabic. It's translated into Hebrew, various translations that are out there. And he wrote poems of all types. He wrote poems that you might call romantic poems, about family relationships, about nature. And he also wrote poems that were piyutim, that were part of the Jewish liturgy. One of them, and this is 34 in your books, is called Yom Achpi Hichbadati. And this particular work is not about Zionism. It's again about this need for all of us to look inward at our own faults and to overcome these faults. One of the most tragic and dastardly faults of the Jewish people long, long ago was the murder of Zechariah. Zechariah was a man, a prominent Jewish man, a Kohen Gadol, and he was murdered by the Jews themselves. So much so that when the Babylonians in the first temple came and invaded and besieged and eventually conquered Yerushalayim, they entered the Beis HaMikdash. The dispute exactly where in the Beis HaMikdash this took place. And there they found a puddle of blood. And the blood was seething, was boiling, bubbling. Didn't stop. They couldn't imagine what it was. And they came, the Gemara and the Midrashim describe in detail exactly what happened. They asked the Jews, what is this blood? And the Jews, of course, were ashamed and embarrassed to say, it's the blood of Zechariah whom we killed. Because if you tell an enemy, in this case the Babylonians, that you killed a fellow Jew, they'll see that as permission, if not encouragement, to kill other Jews. So they denied, they didn't say it was his blood, they said it was the blood of cows, sheep, from these animal sacrifices in the Beis HaMikdash. But the Babylonians were not dumb, and they analyzed the blood, and they realized this is not the blood of cattle, this is the blood of humans. What is this all about? And they had to confess, this is the blood of Zechariah whom we killed. They decided, of course, to take vengeance against the Jews. You're a bunch of murderers, we've got to kill you. And there was a massacre, many, many Jews were killed, until finally the Babylonian commander said, okay, enough already. We can't kill so much. There's a limit. Let's stop. This story, which goes back, of course, a long time, to the time of the first Beis HaMikdash, and in Medrash and in Gemara has various variants of the story, is captured in this poem, this Kinot, by Yehuda Halevi. So again, I'm just going to study with you a paragraph or two, a stanza or two, and then pause and recite the rest of it slowly, carefully, your own time and your own pace. Let's just take a look at this. By the way, you can see why we are so sure that this is written by Yehuda Halevi, because if you look on page 34 in the Hebrew, you will see that he puts his initials into the beginning of each paragraph. So the first paragraph is Yom with a Yud. Second paragraph is Hoya, it's a Hey, Yud Hey. Then Uvachal, Yud Hey Vav. Then Dalid, Yehud. So obviously the next paragraph is going to begin with a Hey, Yehuda. And there you have the Yehuda spelled out, it's Yehuda Halevi. That's something that not many people are aware of, that this particular Kinot was authored by none other than Yehuda Halevi. And it begins, Yom Achpi Hichbadeti. The day of my oppression weighed heavily upon me. And he's talking about Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av is a heavy day. It's a heavy day for all of us, more so this year than in many previous years. But going way, way back, the first Beis HaMikdash, Yehuda Halevi, writing in Spain in the 11th century, Yom Achpi Hichbadeti. The day of my oppression weighed heavily upon me. V'yikaflu avonai. My sins have doubled. In other words, there's two layers of sin that I'm guilty of. B'sholchi yad bedam novi. I sent my hand against the life of a prophet. Zechariah was a prophet. B'chatzar mikdash Hashem. In the courtyard of God's temple. I killed, I murdered, sent my hand against the life of one of God's prophets. V'lochi sosru adama. And the earth didn't cover it. Ad bo cherev monai. Until the arrival of my tormentor's sword. In other words, until the Babylonians came, the blood still remained, a puddle of blood in the Beis HaMikdash. V'lo shokat adei hukam. And it was not silenced until it was avenged. Until the Babylonians came and slaughtered the Jews, accusing them of the murder of Zechariah, the blood kept bubbling, didn't stop. V'gam hifli pliliya. And terrible, horrible things, ghastly acts were performed. Massacre, pogrom. Vayerev bevas Yehuda ta'aniya va'aniya. It increased among the daughter of Judah, among the Jewish people, ta'aniya va'aniya, agony and mourning. So this is how he kind of jumps in, the poet jumps into Tisha B'Av, to the day of my heavy weight upon me, my double sins, the sins of having killed, not only murdered, but murdered a Navi, a prophet. Hayaholech v'soer, the second stanza begins. The blood continued to seethe ad bo rav tabochim, until Nebuzaradan, one of the Babylonian generals, executioner, until he came. Uvoel migdash Hashem, he came into God's sanctuary. Umatzah domim roschim, he discovered the boiling blood. Vayishal levav rozeh, and he inquired, what is this? What's this all about? La kohanim hazovchim, he asked this question of the priests who were slaughtering animals for the sacrifices. Vayanuhu, they responded, oh, ein zeh kiyim dam hazvochim. This is simply the blood of animal sacrifices. Gam hu zovach lachkor. So what he did is he decided to investigate, and he slaughtered animals, sheep, goats. Mazevi al mahoyo. What is this all about? What's going on here? Omar l'nafshi, and I said to myself, I had to confess to myself, zechat osech v'zeh piryo. This is your sin. It's you Jewish people who killed or allowed such a person to be killed in the temple, in the Beis HaMikdash. V'zeh piryo. Now you're seeing the fruits of your murder. You're seeing the enemy, Nebuzaradan, the Babylonian general. Uv'chol zos lo shokat. It still didn't stop. V'yodo kayom nigrosh, and it still persists like the storming sea. Vayivukash hadovor, vayimotzei meforosh. Notice the poetry here, by the way. Clear, relatively easy to understand. The rhymes are impeccable. Nigrosh, meforosh, shoresh, nidrosh. This is a five-star poet. Kidam isho Elohim alocha mas shorash. The blood of a man who did no wrong, no injustice, but was uprooted. Shorash, uprooting. Vayomen Nevuzradan v'gam damo hinei nidrosh. So Nevuzradan said, okay, now comes the accounting. Now comes the reckoning. Isfuli haKohanim, he slaughtered the Kohanim, etc. Encourage you to read the rest, the second half of this powerful, stirring poem. Perhaps cry a little bit about the murder itself and the fact that Jewish people could murder one of their own holy and extremely, extremely pious and important leaders. And then we'll continue with another Kinot by Yehuda Halevi. I'd like to share with you a little bit of the background of Yehuda Halevi. Yehuda Halevi lived in the late 1000s into the 1100s, late 11th and the early 12th centuries. Is often associated with what was called the Golden Age of Spain. Spain then, or at least this part of Spain where he lived, was dominated by Islam, by the Muslims. And the Jews had a kind of a complex association with the Muslims in many, many ways. And Yehuda Halevi's poetry is really based upon his inspiration that he derived from the Arabic poetry, the Arabic culture. Arab culture then was noted for its famous philosophers who were all Aristotelians, philosophers, followers of Aristotle, who wrote voluminously and brilliantly, Averroes and others, and also of great poets. And a lot of the Jews of that time were influenced and became themselves philosophers like Yehuda Halevi, like Ibn Ezra, and great poets like Ibn Ezra and Yehuda Halevi and others. So Halkin, in his biography, which I shared with you and recommend to you, has something to say about the Jewish relationship with our host countries, all of which were either Christian or Muslim. And he quotes, and I'll read you the translation of one of his other poems. And it reads, "A rare beauty," referring to the Jewish people, "far from her place of high birth," who's not in Eretz Yisrael, "why does she laugh when her lover is wroth?" How can the Jewish people be happy in Spain, Muslim Spain, or Christian Spain, when their lover, God, is angry? "She laughs at the daughters of Edom and at Arabia's minions and at the thought that they cover her bow." Meaning that the daughters of Edom, that's Rome, Christianity, and Arabia's minions, Arabia's people, Arabia's masses, who cover her bow, who cover her lover. Low-born sows, S-O-W-S, that means pigs in English. These are lowly people. Don't they know that she lay in his arms as his doe? The Jewish people were beloved by God, like a mother deer and her doe, D-O-E. Where are their prophets? Where are the Jewish prophets? They're getting so close to Edom and to Arabia, to Christianity and to Islam. Where are their prophets? Where's their menorah? Where their holy ark and the Shekhinah? Don't, my foes, don't hope to quench love's desire. My foes, Christianity and Islam, don't hope to quench the waters of my love for God. You will only be burned by its fire. It's a powerful poem, and it gives the author Halkin an opportunity to speak about the relationship between Christianity and Islam. He writes a lot about the theological and religious differences between Judaism and Christianity. I won't go into that here today, but he writes very instructively about the relationship between Judaism and Islam, which is our concern nowadays, this time of history, present time of history. So he writes, the Christian argument with Judaism, while more bitter, was also more to the point and less demeaning from a Jewish point of view. Since Christianity understood every word of the Hebrew Bible to be divinely given and true, there was some commonality we have with Christianity. Christianities believe in the Bible, and obviously so do we. We believe that perhaps they misread the Old Testament, but there was still, they never denied Jews their own reality. They may have slaughtered us, there may have been crucifixions, there may have been crusades, but there was a certain agreement, certain theological agreement between Christianity and Judaism. An interesting thought to consider. Now here's the point that I want to make today. And it helps us in some ways understand the relationship between the state of Israel and its Arab neighbors. But Islam did deny Jewish reality right from its starting point in the story of Avraham, which according to the Quran had been deliberately tampered by the book of Genesis. In other words, Bereshis themselves, Islam does not take it literally as do Christians, but rather they substitute Yitzchak as the subject of the Akedah, as Avram's son, with Yishmael. Yishmael, who's considered the ultimate arch father of the Islamic people, Yishmael, he takes Yitzchak's place. So they actually distort and destroy the meaning of Chumash Bereshis. Nor was this so of Abraham alone. Adam, Noach, Yaakov, Yosef, Moshe, David, Shlomo. The life of every major figure in the Bible is told differently by the Quran. A Christian has the Old Testament, he has the stories of Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Shlomo, David, etc. But the Quran has a whole different version, which charges Hebrew scripture and rabbinic tradition, which charges Torah Shebiksav and Torah Shebal Peh with systematic distortion while rating them for much of its material. In other words, they steal from us the narrative, but they substitute their own distortions. That's the Quran. Woe, says Muhammad, and it's a quote from the Quran, to those who wrote the book, meaning Tanakh, with their hands, and then said, this is from Allah. So it's the denial of the very basis of the Jewish faith, which Christians don't deny the basis of the Jewish faith. Islam does. And this, as I understand it, is at the root, somehow deep down in every Jew, is an understanding of the place of Tanakh and of Torah Shebal Peh in our faith. And every devout Muslim who exposes himself and reads and studies and recites the Quran is coming away with a different picture entirely. To thinking Jews, this made Islam not a less, but a more preposterous faith than Christianity. If Christianity was an affront to rational monotheism, Islam was an insult to human intelligence itself, since who could take seriously a religion that, having come into existence 2,000 years after its parent faith, accused the parent of counterfeiting a past of which it alone possessed the true version. For 2,000 years we had a Torah Shebiksav. No one contested the fact that this is our Torah Shebiksav. Jesus and his followers did not contest Tanakh. They did not contest the story of the Bible. And to this day, the Old Testament remains part of the Christian Bible. But the people of Arabia, it's a different story. They were even worse impostors than the daughters of Edom, than the Christians. The sophistication of their culture was admired. Islam then was philosophers, poets, even mathematicians. So we respected, we admired that sophistication. Their language and their literature were objects of emulation. Yehuda Halevi himself copied, imitated, was inspired by the language and literature of the Arab culture. But religiously, that's where there's a big gap. There were crass upstarts. No adherent of Judaism could hold otherwise. I share this with you because as we speak about the current conflicts in the Middle East and the various enemies that we face, besides all the politics, etc., from the river to the sea, etc., there's a very fundamental, deep aspect of religion in which we're very, very different from them. We're further away, much further away. Islam is much further away from Judaism than Christianity is. And it's an important lesson for Jews and for everyone to keep in mind. There's a basic difference, and that difference goes back a long way, and it's in some ways irreconcilable. One of the things that, of course, has caused the anti-Zionism comes from this Islamic view of Zion. Zion does not hold a place in the Islamic religion. Mecca, Medina do, but not Jerusalem, not Zion. And that's at the root of the anti-Zionism that we find in our own midst in various segments of the Jewish community. Anti-Zionism. So let's look at a pro-Zionistic position of Yehuda Halevi. The last 6 or 7, or perhaps a bit more, of the Kinos, in the standard Kinos booklet, all begin, with one exception, with the word Zion, Zion. This is repeated again and again and again. We're only going to look at the first of these, which is the famous one written by Yehuda Halevi. They're known as the Zion Kinos, the Zion Kinos, the Kinos of Zion. And the poetry here is overwhelmingly beautiful. And again, what I'll do is just focus on a few chosen phrases and passages, then we'll pause and allow you to recite and study at your own pace. This is Kinot 36, number 36, begin on pages 555 in the Hebrew and 55-54 in the English translation. And it begins with these words, Zion, Zion. Halo sishali lishlom asirayach. Will you not inquire after the well-being of your imprisoned ones? Lishlom asirayach, imprisoned ones. Now he, of course, is talking about Jewish people who are imprisoned in Spain, in Italy, in Germany, in France, in Persia, and perhaps in North Africa, in early medieval times. And they're imprisoned. They're not home. They're not in Zion. They're not in Zion. So they're Asirayach. So Zion, he's talking to Zion, personifying Zion, and saying, Zion, Zion, surely you will inquire, how are they doing in France and in Spain and in Italy and in wherever else the Jews were exiled in the 1000s and 1100s. But again, as is so often the case, and I'm trying to drive this point home, looking at what he was concerned with 1,000 years ago is still our concern today. We have Asirayach, we have Jewish men, Jewish women, Jewish children who are still being held hostage, imprisoned, servile, captive in Gaza. So we too can turn to Zion as if Zion was a person, and certainly to the God of Zion, Lokayach Zion, and say, aren't you concerned about Shalom Asirayach, about the well-being of those who are imprisoned for you, literally imprisoned in tunnels and God knows where? Dorshei Shlomech, they seek your peace, they seek your well-being. Vehem Yeser Adorayach, these are the remnant of your flock. Amo v'tzon mari'iso, we are God's people, we are God's flock, and we are imprisoned. We are imprisoned, some of us, in Gaza. We are imprisoned wherever else we are in the world, if not in Eretz Yisrael. If we're in Borough Park or Flatbush or Lakewood or Muncie, or if we're in London, or if we're in South Africa or Australia or wherever we are, we're imprisoned. And we're the remnant of your flock. Miyom u'mizrach u'mitzofon v'seimon, and he spells it out. From west to east to north and south. Shalom rachok v'karov, se'i mikol avorayach. Promote the well-being of the distant and the close from every direction. God, help us in our exile wherever we are. We're north of Eretz Yisrael, we're in Russia. We're south of Eretz Yisrael, we're in Yemen, or in South Africa. We're east of Eretz Yisrael, we're in the Philippines, in Japan. We're to the west, certainly Western Europe, Eastern Europe, Western Europe, America, United States, Canada, South America, Brazil, Argentina. Where they're not Jews, God, remember them, take us back from these places. Shalom asir ta'avo, as well as the well-being of those bound by longing. We are not only imprisoned by chains or tunnels or prison cells, we are chained by our longing. We want not to be here, but to be in Eretz Yisrael. We are Zionists, no matter where we are politically, economically, religiously, spiritually, etc. We are asirei ta'ava. We are prisons of our longing for Sion. No sein de mo'ov ketal Hermon. We shed our tears, here we go again with tears, like the dew on Mount Hermon. V'nichsaf l'ridatom al hawarayach. We wish to shed them on your mountains. Instead of crying on the Catskills or on the Alps, we want to cry on the mountains around Yerushalayim. This is a powerful opening of the poet Yehuda Halevi, the Zionist, the art Zionist. We're all imprisoned where we are now. It's a very important concept. I want to pause now to allow the audience to read and soak in, absorb the rest of this poem by just reading along on your own and following the translation and the commentary of Rav Soloveitchik, which begins on page 558 and goes on for several pages. Take your time. It's a long day. We'll stop now. So you've now sampled one of the half dozen or so keynotes which begin Tzion, the Tzion, the lead-off batter, the starting pitcher of the entire barrage of pro-Tzion, the necessity of Tzion, the desire for Tzion, the thirst for Tzion, the Zionism, which is an essential part of Yahadus. You sampled one keynote, and on your own you can sample others. But there's another aspect to Tzion, and that is the bond between Tzion and Torah. Put it very simply, the bond between the state of Israel and our Torah, our religion, the bond between the land and our faith. It's a very close bond. Ki mitzion teitzei sora, Duvar Hashem Yerushalayim. Famous pasuk from the Navi. We sing it as a song. Ki mitzion teitzei sora. Torah comes from Tzion. Torah Eretz Yisrael is in a different category than the Torah of Bavel or Volozhin or Lakewood or you name it. Torah Eretz Yisrael. Ki mitzion teitzei sora, Dvar Hashem Yerushalayim. What is the significance of Ki mitzion teitzei sora? I want to introduce you to a radical, extreme pro-Zionist position taken by Chazal and introduced to us by Rashi. I'm not going to any other sources, contemporary or ancient. Rashi. The Rashi in Chumash, which I'm sure you've come across at one point or another in your studies. V'samtem es devorai ele. This is a pasuk from Kriyat Shema, Parshas Ekev. You should place these words upon your heart. So Rashi says, Af li'achar shetiglu, even after you're exiled from the land of Israel, from Zion, heyu mitsuyanim b'mitzvos, still be distinct, be special, have your own culture, and perform mitzvos. Hanichu tefillin, put on tefillin. Asu mezuzah, make a mezuzah for your doors. Why? If we're in Gullus, we're living in Germany, we're living in Morocco, we're living in Singapore. Why do we have to keep these mitzvos? Aren't these mitzvos only to be kept in the land of Israel? It's a question people can ask. Why not, as so many European Jews did in the late 1800s? It came by ship to the United States, and just before the ship docked, and wherever they were docking, in the harbor of New York or wherever, they would throw their tefillin overboard. Who needs it anymore? We're in a new country, a new world. No. Rashi says we are to keep these, but we're to keep them as markers. Why markers? Because one day, maybe in a year, maybe in 100 years, maybe in 200 years, you're going back to Eretz Yisrael. You're going back to the land of Israel. And when you get back there, that's where you really have to keep mitzvos. That's what they're meant for. Even mezuzah, tzitzis, and tefillin, they're all meant for Eretz Yisrael. But so that you shouldn't forget about the mitzvos, keep them in Germany or Morocco or in Singapore. V'chein hu omer, and this is a pasuk in Yirmiyahu, Hatzivi loch tzionim. Make tzionim. Make for yourselves markers, reminders. I'm a Jew. One day I'm going back to Eretz Yisrael, so I got to put on tefillin now here in Chicago. This is the language of Rashi. Ramban, on that same pasuk, this is again in Parshas Ekev, continues, Ukfar kosafti, I have already written about this. Ki ha-mitzvos ho'ele chovas hagufim. Those mitzvos like Shemitah and Trumas and Maestras and all its agricultural mitzvos that the Torah, we have so many of those mitzvos, those are for Eretz Yisrael only. That in Kansas, you don't have to worry about Shemitah. All right. But chovos haguf, personal mitzvahs that you do yourself, tefillin and tzitzis, etc., you keep them wherever you live, b'chol makom. But there's a great secret, says the Ramban, sod amok, and that is that these mitzvahs, tefillin, divrei Torah, mezuzah, are repeated in the parsha, second parsha of Kriyat Shema. After you have the first parsha, what do you need the second parsha? Lirmos b'hekesh hazeh, to hint at the fact that we are chayav, we are obligated in these mitzvos li'achar hagolus, b'chutz la'aretz, no matter where we are, in Russia, and France, and in Brazil, and Argentina, and Australia, New Zealand, u'mehem nilmod l'chol ha-mitzvos shehen chovas haguf shechiyuvim b'chol makom. V'sheniye peturin b'chutz la'aretz mechovas hakarka, etc. Ikar HaKosov is ba'aretz. The mitzvos of Eretz Yisrael. The Torah is for Eretz Yisrael. If you keep the Torah wherever you are in the rest of the world, it's so that when you come back to Israel, you should be able to keep it. If you're an anti-Zionist, there's no reason to keep the Torah anywhere, because I don't believe I'm ever going back to Eretz Yisrael. I don't need it. I discount the whole land, give it back to whomever. All right. And after all, the Torah says the Ramban, it's on this land, the land of Israel, that you're going to have a long life. Do these mitzvahs so that you should live longer, and at least in your old age, you'll return to Eretz Yisrael. At least you'll be buried in Eretz Yisrael. The connection to Eretz Yisrael is basic to the performance of mitzvahs. That's a powerful, powerful topic, and one we can go on and on about. But we do mitzvos as tzionim and tziyunim. Tziyunim means as markers, reminders that we're going back to Eretz Yisrael. We're going back to Israel. That's where we belong. That's where the mitzvos are best performed. All the mitzvos, even tefillin and mezuzah and sukkah and lulav, etc. It's all about that, number one. And number two, these are markers, tziyunim, and we're also tzionim. We are Zionists. There's no such thing as Judaism without Zionism. So we mourn for Zion. We've studied that now a bit, but we also mourn for the Torah. We mourn for the Torah. How do we mourn for the Torah? Now we refer to another Kinot. It's Kinot 41. It's on page 591, the Hebrew, and 590, the beginning of the English translation. And it begins, Sha'ali Sirufa Vo'esh. Inquire, you who is consumed in fire. Lishlom Avelayech, for the peace of your mourners. This poem, this Kinot, is written by a most fascinating personality, the great Gedolei HaRishonim. Some consider him to be the last of the Balei HaTosfos, Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg, the Maharam Rothenburg. The Maharam Rothenburg composed this poem over the burning of the Talmud. In Paris in the late 1290s, 1294, was consumed in fire. The church decided it was time to burn the Talmud. And they had many wagon loads, this is way before the printing press, many scrolls, Torah scrolls, other Sifrei Kodesh, and they consumed them in fire. The Maharam Rothenburg was very, I gave you the wrong date. The burning of the books of the Talmud was in 1242, not 1292, 1242, which was in the lifetime of the Maharam Rothenburg. And he wrote this poem as a Kinot, as a lamentation for the burning of the Torah. Shali Serufa Bo'esh. I want you to notice, you can spend more time on this, that he was mimicking, deliberately for sure, the poetic style of Rabbi Yehuda Halevi. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is talking about the loss of Zion. Maharam Rothenburg, a generation or two later, is talking about the loss of Torah, the burning of the Torah. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi begins, Sha'ali, Zion halo tishali. Zion, won't you inquire? And Maharam Rothenburg begins, Sha'ali Shrufa Ba'esh. You who are consumed in fire. The Torah, Sha'ali, inquire. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is talking about the Asirei Zion, the prisoners of Zion, and he's talking who are imprisoned. He's not talking about prisoners. We're not imprisoned by the burning of the Torah, but rather the Shlom Avelayech. Not Asirayech, not the imprisoned ones, but rather the mourners, those who are mourning desperately about the burning of the Torah. Hamisavim shechon bechatzar zevuloyech. We yearn to be part of the chatzar zevuloyech, of your dwellings. Notice the mixing between the Torah scrolls and the dwelling in Zion, that connection. Ki mitzion teitzei sora. I'll encourage you to take some time now to study not only the poem Sha'ali Sirufa Ba'esh, but also and especially the commentary of Rav Soloveitchik, which begins on page 594. And he can convey to you some of the many, many deep thoughts that he had that can certainly surpass my own capacity. So I'll leave that to you, and we'll pause for a moment before we continue to reflect on Zion and Torah. And speaking about the centrality of Zion, of Zion, to Torah, I can think of no better relatively recent source than the lectures and writings of Rav Yosef Dov Soloveitchik, Zecher Tzadik Livrocha. I was never a direct student of Rav Soloveitchik, but I attended quite a few of his memorial lectures, his yahrzeit, his shiurim he gave on the yahrzeit of his father, Rav Moshe Soloveitchik, Zatzal. And upon various other occasions, I had the occasion to listen to him. The days I listened to him, he was still delivering most of his talks and shiurim in Yiddish. Rav Soloveitchik was the master really of three languages at least, Hebrew and Yiddish and English, probably German as well. But in Yiddish, he was over the top, supreme. His Yiddish was really something. So through the efforts of OU Press, and especially the efforts of Mr. Julie Berman, may it be well, we have, and I'm holding it in my hand, a collection of Rabbi Soloveitchik's drushos on the whole topic of what we call today Zionism. I have here the Yiddish original, his original Yiddish, which was handwritten mostly by him himself, as well as an English translation of the Yiddish. I want to share with you just one aspect, one brief paragraph or two from his writings. In Yiddish, the book is called Droshes, Veken Shivas Zion und Kiyum Ha'umah. Droshes, lectures about the return to Zion and the eternity of the nation, of the Jewish people. And we now, at this crossroads in our history, when we're fighting, literally fighting to keep the land under the control of the state of Israel, we feel ourselves to be in crisis. We're attacked from all sides. Tragedy upon tragedy, difficulties, political, military, economic, spiritual and religious as well. Many difficulties. We feel ourselves to be in crisis. What does Rav Soloveitchik have to advise us about being in crisis? Fascinating. Here's what he writes. I'll begin in Yiddish and then switch to English. In a crisis wird a Mensch groß. In an eist Zorro kriegt an Umma Visie und an Nitzutz von Nevuah. Wir befinden dem Ribbonisch Shalom nicht nur wie die religiöse Denker zwischen die Umma in der Pracht und der Gesamtheit von Harmonie von der Brie, in die moralische Prinzipien und Keuchers, welche herrschen in dem Kosmos, welche nicht allemal kann man bemerken, nur euch in Sorge und in Schibud, in Verzweiflung und Jiusch, in einer indifferenter, schlechter und falscher Welt, in einer Welt von Macht, Chanufa, in Obnarerei. Even in those circumstances, we believe in God and we believe in Am Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael. Let me translate into English in the Karasik Family Edition, The Return to Zion, also published by OU Press, Addresses on Religious Zionism. Here's the English translation of what I just read to you, probably mispronounced a few words in Yiddish. A person achieves greatness in crisis. A nation attains vision and the spark of prophecy in a time of distress. We find the master of the universe not only as the religious thinkers among the nations of the world do, in the splendor, order, and harmony of the creation. in the sometimes invisible moral principles and forces that govern the cosmos. Not only in the good times do we feel a closeness to God, are we inspired, do we have a vision, but in crisis. As he writes, but also in tribulation and subjugation, in despair and despondency, in an indifferent, cruel, false world, in a world of power, flattery, and deception. In fact, in such a world, one needs the master of the universe more than in a beautiful ethical setting. Mima'amakim karosicha Hashem. Out of the depths I call you, O Lord. Mima'amakim means crisis. Out of the depths, out of crisis grows a great, magnificent Knesset Yisrael, reborn and renewed, young and vigorous. There is no evil from which good cannot come, no sin out of which a new ethical principle cannot develop, no falling down without rising back up, and no time of distress in which the countenance of Mashiach cannot be seen. The powerful, powerful words that are so important, so helpful at this point in our history. And it all is in a book, Yiddish or English, The Return to Zion, Droshos wegen Shivas Tzion. As we examine the various texts that we've looked at today, I want to share with you a thought from a conversation that I overheard from Rav Adin Steinsaltz, Zecher Tzadik Livrocha. Some of you may know I had a close relationship with Rabbi Steinsaltz because I was privileged to be the editor-in-chief of the Koren Talmud Bavli, which is a translation into English of Rav Steinsaltz's majestic translation into Hebrew of the entire Shas Bavli. And we worked together somewhat, and I came to know him. And this is what I heard him say. He spoke, of course, in Ivrit. I'll paraphrase it. In the old books, the old Jewish books, the old Shulchan Aruchs, and some of the old Shas, there was something in the front page which read that the Gentiles who are referred to in this book are not today's Gentiles. Today's Gentiles are improved. Some of them are very religious and very pro-Judaism. Fine. We're talking about the old Amolage, the one-time Gentiles. They were barbaric, etc. But now, don't think that whenever we mention a Gentile, we're talking about current Gentiles. No, we're talking about people of the past. Rav Steinsaltz went on to say that some of us, and maybe we're all guilty of this, approach Jewish texts in the same way. But instead of saying that the text might refer to Gentiles, to non-Jews in some inappropriate way, that was the old people from centuries ago, but now it's different. Many people have the same attitude and they say, everything I'm studying here about my people, the Jews, well, that's about my grandfather. That's about my great-grandfather. That's not about me. I'm modern. I'm woke. I'm living in this world here now. Whenever I read here, it's very nice, very interesting, but it's all about the past Jews, not about the current Jews. No, you can't read it that way. Whenever you look at a Chumash, whenever you look at a Bat Gemara, whenever you learn a Musa Sefer, whenever you say Tehillim, you're not talking about the Jews of a long time ago. You're talking about yourself. You're talking about now. And if there's one, I hate to use the word benefit, but one thing we can learn from October 7th is the Kinot and Tisha B'Av is not just about what happened 70 plus years ago in the Holocaust, and not just about the pogroms, and not just about the Spanish Inquisition, and not just about the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. No, it's not just about that. It's about us. It's about us. Every Kinot speaks to us. Every Tehillim speaks to us. Every poem by Primo Levi or by Nelly Sachs speaks to us, even these many years after the Holocaust. There's an October 7th to remind us we are the subject of Torah Shebiksav and Torah Shebal Peh and Musas Forum and Chassidish Forum and Shulchan Aruch, etc. It's all about us in this year, Tafshin Pei Dalet 2024. Fascinating point made by Rav Steinsaltz, and I urge you to think of it, to consider it very well. The traditional ending of the Kinos is Kinot 45, which again, we will sing only select parts of it, and I allow you to, or encourage you, to read the rest of it on your own, at your own pace. It's Kinot 45, page 611 and 610 in the Kinos book. And I'll just tune you into the melody with my hoarse voice. Eli Tzion v'yoreho, kamo isha b'tzireho, v'chivisu lo chagur asak, al ba'al yureho. Lament Zion and her cities, like a woman in her labor pains, like a maiden girl in sackcloth for the husband of her youth. That leading paragraph, that leading stanza in this poem, the concluding poem of the traditional Kinos, presents us with a metaphor that's so important. It's the metaphor that our relationship with God and our relationship with Zion is like the relationship either of a woman in labor or a young girl in sackcloth for the husband of her youth. In other words, we are either fertile, productive women, but going through the pain of birthing, or we are the young woman widowed at a very young age and nebuch, yearning for the husband of her youth. We're still young, we're still powerful, we still can be fruitful and productive, but we yearn to reconnect with something much older, much more ancient, and much more profound than everything else we might be concerned with. That's the theme of Eli Tzion v'yoreho, which ends again, Alei Shimcho Asher Hulal, your name which is desecrated in the mouth of those who stand against her. B'fi komai mitzereho, we are facing now komai mitzereho, those who stand against us, and in the process desecrate the name of God. V'al tachan yitzafchu loch, and for the prayer which they shout to you, kishov ushma amoreho, hear and heed her words. And it concludes with a repetition of the first paragraph. Eli Tzion v'yoreho, kamo isha b'tzireho. We are like a pregnant woman giving birth with birth pangs. It's painful, it's bitter, it's very difficult, but it's something is being born, something of great value, something of living life, of living long life. We may feel like a maiden girl in sackcloth, having lost her young, dearest sweetheart, but still has a life in front of her, a life of a future, of a binyan, of building and accomplishing. I encourage you now to study that and sing that conclusion on your own, and then we'll spend a little bit of time on my own conclusion to these kinos. We've concluded the kinos, and even within the kinos, we try to end on a note, an upbeat note, with optimism, with crisis being an opportunity to grow and to better oneself and to reach higher and higher heights. Now we're in a post-closing phase. The Ramah in Shulchan Aruch says you've got to end the whole morning or a day-long recitation of Kinos with an upbeat note, with divrei nechama, with words of hope and consolation. So I want to share with you some words of hope. First of all, from someone whom we lost just a short few years ago, a very contemporary, modern 20th, 21st century personality. That's Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. Rabbi Sachs used to compare hope to optimism. What's the difference between an optimist and a hopeful person? And he said the optimist is a person who thinks that everything will be okay. Everything will be all right. Everything will work out. He has an attitude, optimistic attitude, very nice. Hope is more than that. It's more than optimism. Hope is the conviction as that you can make things better. Not just things will be better, but you can actively, proactively make things better. That's the hopeful person. That's what hope is. I can reinforce Rabbi Sachs's words going back a couple of centuries to a fascinating personality, perhaps one of the most fascinating personalities in Jewish history, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto. We know him, we Yeshiva Bochrim, know him as the author of Mesilas Yeshorim. But he was also a brilliant and innovative Mekubal, mystic. He was a mystic. He died tragically young, and there's plenty to mourn about in his brief life, tragically brief life. But he wrote voluminously. And his works have relatively recently been gathered by a man who's also since passed away, Rabbi Chaim Friedlander. It's a multi-volume edition of the various works of the Ramchal with explanations and background. One of those books in the Rabbi Chaim Friedlander series is entitled Otzros Ramchal, Treasures of the Ramchal, of the Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto. And he has there a couple of pages of a drush, a sermon that he once gave. This goes back now into early and middle 1700s. Drush be'inyon hakivui. Kivui is a way of saying tikva, hatikva, hope. Kaveil Hashem, hope for God, hope. So kivui is hope. And the famous three-word pasuk in the Torah about the importance of hope is Lishuascha kivisi Hashem. God, I hope, kivisi, for your Yeshua, Lishuascha, for your redemption, your salvation. He says something here mightily encouraging. And it's encouraging for all of us who are here, for people better than us, and for people maybe not as good as we are. He writes as follows: Hamakaveh, a person who's hopeful, afal pi sheyesh lo ma'at ma'asim tovim, even though he has very few good deeds. All of us, let's be honest with each other, with ourselves. How many good deeds do we have? A few. We gave a little stucca, we learned a little Torah, we called our relatives to say how you're doing. We visited the sick a couple of times. We did a few good deeds, but not enough to hope for wonderful things. No way. Lo yevosh, he says, they shouldn't be embarrassed. Shenema v'yodato ki ani Hashem asher lo yevoshu kovoy. The pasuk says, I, God, those who hope for my assistance, my divine assistance, don't have to worry about it. V'zeh ki yesh ledal tikva. As poor as you are, poor morally, poor ethically, poor religiously, poor spiritually, deprived, there's always hope. There's always tikva. Umisha hu dal mima'asim tovim, if you're bereft of good deeds, yesh lo tikva, you still have hope. Ki Hashem miskalel, of God appears above you, umavir kol pshoim, and removes all of your faults. V'zeh sof hatikun, this is the tikun. Migo del tikvas kol Yisrael biorech hagolus, ubotrim b'amunah sheyigalu. This has been the Jewish way now for a long time. decades, centuries, millennia, the Jewish person has been the person of hope and faith. V'sof hatikva u'mashtiyas avon ha'oretz. That's the Lishuas HaKivisi. That's the Lishuas HaKivisi. And that's God's glory, that we continue to hope in Him. Bizman sha'tzadikim batzoro. When we are in times of sorrows, when we're in times of deep problems, the problems that face us today, Imo anochi b'tzora. God is with us b'tzora, in the midst of all these difficulties. Kaviyachol. Uvekoach hatikva yotzei min hatzora. We can leave the problem, leave the crisis with hope. Hope is the antidote to crisis. Hu kaviyachol yotzei imo. God goes out with us. K'moshe nebab mitzrayim. Lishuascha kivisi. Lishuascha, your divine help, your salvation, Yeshua. Yeshuas Hashem shahaya imo b'tzora. Kivisi Hashem lishuascha. As a mystic, he concludes with the barriers to our hope. Our hope, our prayers are often met with resistance of our enemies, resistance of darker forces that are in our way. And he concludes, and remember that he is a makubal, he's speaking at a mystical level as he writes this. Bo re'eh, notice, he says, Hatzadikim ma'alim tfilosehem la'oznei hamelech. The righteous people try to lift up their prayers toward the king. Shenemar, vayispalel el Hashem, vayitzak el Hashem. We're crying out to God. Ubizman sheyesh harbe mekatragim. But there are mekatragim. Kitrug means we have enemies, we have blockades. They could be inner blockades, our own doubt, our own false thoughts, our own misconceptions, our own selfishness can sometimes get in the way of the prayers, or they could be external, enemies of one kind or another. They're in the way. They're preventing the prayer to rise up. We have the pasuk in Echa, Tisha B'Av, Sarkosa ba'onan loch me'avor tefillah. There was a cloud stopping our prayers from rising upward. Aval b'tzadikim hamakavim, those people who are hopeful, v'yosim nisiv u'bikia b'toch anonim, they can find a way to pierce through the clouds. That's his, or Ramchal's, image. There's clouds, but there's a break in the clouds. There's a way of piercing through the clouds, an opening in the clouds. Hope is that opening. When God sees the attempt to open the clouds, to get closer to Him, Yoreid, He comes down, Lishmoa tefilaso mipiv shel hamakaveh. He comes downstairs to hear the voice of the hopeful person. Sod zeh, this is the secret of Kavo kivisi Hashem, vayet elai vayishma shavosi. I hope to God, He leaned down toward me and He heard my prayers. Lishuascha kivisi. Mashani mikaveh, ani oseh shetavo yeshuascha b'shem haseh. God, you will come to me because of the hope I have in you. B'li sheyisakev al yedei hamekatrakim. There'll be no barriers. There'll be no blocking on the way. I want to finally close with a brief thought and some of the melodies appropriate to the day from the second Majid Rebbe, Rav Shol Yedidya Loza Taub, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, who passed away in 1947, late 1947, on Chav Tes November 1947, and who is my wife's grandfather, Chavi's grandfather, and the great-grandfather and great-great-grandfather of our grandchildren, and Baruch Hashem, a large and flourishing number of descendants. But he was an Ohev Tzion, as I mentioned earlier, a lover of Zion. This is one of the main themes of his writing, Tzion, Tzion, Tzion. And he's also a major, major contributor to Jewish music, to Jewish liturgical music, to holy nigunim, to holy melodies. He wrote hundreds, if not thousands, of melodies, some of which are very popular, some of which have sadly been forgotten. But he would quote often the pasuk in Tehillim which reads, "Vata'ar batzar lohem kishamu esri nasam, b'sham'o esri nasam." That God sees our tzaros when he hears our song. We have to keep singing. One of the songs he composed is quite famous. I'd like to share it with you. Pirok yasono mipum aryevoso v'yapek yasamech v'yapek yasamech migoy galuso oy yamech Hamech divechad mikol umahayo. Hamech divechad mikol umahayo. Perok yasonach, redeem your flock, mipum aryavosa, from the mouth of the lions. And that's a kind of a contemplative, perhaps, song of entreaty, song of prayer. But he was also quite capable of composing very lively tunes, some of which he composed at the Kotel in his visits to Eretz Yisrael in the 1930s. And one goes as follows. V'havienu l'tzion ircha, l'tzion ircha berino. Mikdash beis mikdashcha, ay b'mikdashcha b'simchas ha'olam. V'havienu l'tzion ircha, l'tzion ircha berino. V'Yerushalayim beis mikdashcha b'simchas ha'olam. V'havienu l'tzion ircha berino. God, bring us back to Zion, to Zion, your city, Berina, with song, singing songs. That's the way to hope. That's the way to return. That's the way to deal with an Eitz Tzara. That's the way it always was, and that's the way it will be now, B'mheira v'yomenu mamash.